Call this meeting to order. April 10th meeting of the Board of Selectmen. This is a special meeting that we've called to interview for our town manager candidates. Our first interviewee this evening is Mr. Adam Gaudette, town administrator from the town of Spencer.
Good evening.
Good evening. You met all the members of the board.
Did.
Would you like to start by giving us a little bit of your background, a little work history,
Sure.
etc.?
First of all, thank you for having me. I'd probably start off at the college level. I graduated from Worcester State College with a bachelor's degree in sociology. From there, I went on to the University of Massachusetts for a graduate degree. I received a master's in regional planning from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. I grew up in Central Mass, grew up in the Sturbridge area, so commuted to both schools and served me well. My first job out of grad school was with the town of Northbridge. In Northbridge, I was hired as the Planning and Community Development Director. It was a great opportunity for someone right out of graduate school, a small town planner position. As you may know, wears many hats. So right from day one, thrown a lot of different tasks and duties, and was able to learn a lot from the ground running. Exciting time in Northbridge. We undertook an economic development downtown revitalization effort. So we were able to work on multiple projects, including the revitalization of downtown Whitensville and Rochdale. They have several downtown districts. Doing infrastructure projects and different building projects. I was heavily involved with the Blackstone Valley Chamber of Commerce there. Fortunate enough to have a regional Chamber of Commerce right in downtown Whitensville, right near Town Hall. So I had a great connection with the economic development aspects of the region of the Blackstone Valley. So from there, I decided to take a leap to the private sector, something new, something fresh, a different aspect of planning and development. Opened my eyes to the other side of development, real estate, permitting and construction, and certainly the finance aspects of development, which you don't usually see on or understand as much as you would on the municipal side. So again, fortunate enough to be working in that industry during a time where the building industry was booming, 2002, 2006, residential subdivisions, development of green areas, green fields such as the property that was available along 146 provided a great opportunity for development. So I spent many nights working the Blackstone Valley and other areas in Worcester County and northern Rhode Island, permitting projects and working with developers and contractors. So it was a great opportunity at a great time. From there, I decided to take another leap, staying on what I thought was a progressive path for my career development. I went from a small firm, Heritage Design Group, to Toll Brothers. Toll Brothers is a national real estate development chain, Fortune 500. So a lot different than your small mom and pop engineering shop, if you will, 30 or so people. But again, staying in that finance heavy aspect of real estate development. Everything they do is for return on investment for the investors. So I spent a lot of time doing financial analysis and performance on real estate development projects. Again, seeing a heavy side of the finance of projects, but also working with permitting and construction as well. At that time, again, the building was booming in the beginning of that time, but we were approaching a recession. And at that time, I spent a lot of nights on the road, certainly when I was at Heritage Design Group, permitting a lot of projects during the building boom, and again with Toll Brothers being on the road a lot. Starting a young family, I decided to take a job back in Spencer. Spencer is about 15 minutes from my hometown in Sturbridge. It was nice being at such a close distance and proximity to family during that time when you're starting a young family. So, but it was another exciting job. The town planner position in Spencer was not only a town planner, but served as the director of multiple departments. It's known as the Office of Development and Inspection Services. So, under my lead was the building inspector, the planning, zoning, Board of Health, conservation. So, having the background of budgeting and finance and also working with personnel contracts and such with some of the previous employment I had. Being a director of a department was certainly a bigger jump than it was as the town planner was when I started in Northbridge. It was a completely different position, a lot more authority and a lot more involvement in municipal government. We got to see the budgeting side and other aspects, personnel, working within municipal government. In 2009, towards the end of 2009 and the beginning of 2010, the Board of Selectmen, Spencer, and the existing town administrator, who was the second town administrator, had a falling out at that time. It was right in the middle of the recession. It was a very difficult time. We just received about $1 million in cuts through 9 C cuts at that time. So along with some infighting on the board and some disagreements with the town administrator, there was certainly a stressful time. They came to a separation agreement, and when looking around town hall, asked someone to step in. They approached me and asked me if I'd be willing to step in. I'm someone who likes challenges. I've always looked for opportunities to progress my career, and even though it was a difficult time, it was a great opportunity. 7 years later, I'm still in that position, so it worked well for me. Certainly times have gotten better, and I think I'll try and answer some of your questions later and talk about how I was able to stabilize the town at that time coming out of the recession, and I think we're in a pretty good spot today. But that's a little bit about my background and how I got here.
Great, thank you. What we're going to do now is just have a series of questions that we'll ask. Take as much time as you need to answer them. I'm going to start with Mr. Fitzgerald.
Well, good evening. Congratulations on making the cut to this point.
Thank you.
And I think that was a nice summary of your background and experiences and the opportunity that was given you and how you took it. So that was good to hear. I'm as interested to understand about your style and your personality as I am of your technical ability. And to that extent, I'd like you to explain to us a bit about your management style. And by management style, I mean how you might communicate in particular with your department heads and your personnel with it. What kind of formats? Are you very formal, a little bit more informal? And I'm going to follow up with that, with juxtaposing that to how you might react and communicate with the public at large, because it's different now than it was 20 years ago and a lot more things going on. So there's a two-part question.
Sure.
Take what you can.
Okay, I'll start off with staff relations and management style. Having coming from the private sector, where I think where I developed a certain style, working with a close-knit group of 30 or so people during a very hectic time during the development period, certainly developed a team approach. Coming into Spencer, I remember when I first started as the town administrator, and I was asked to fill those shoes. And again, it was a tumultuous time, infighting on the board. I remember going around to my staff at that time, who were about to become my staff, that if we were going to succeed through this, it was going to be a team effort. It was not just going to be myself. It was going to be, they had to buy into what I was trying to do, and at the same time, I needed to lean on them as much as possible during a difficult time. And I'm glad to say that we were able to do that. I have a wonderful staff. I take their expertise and their opinions with everything I do. I have bi-weekly staff meetings, 8 o'clock on Thursday mornings. I'll go over the results of the previous selectmen's meeting and then talk about upcoming selectmen's agendas. I'll also talk about major things going on, either projects or budget, warrant, those types of things. So it is a different age than it was 20 years ago. So texting is very common. You know, it's not uncommon to get a text at 3 o'clock in the morning from the fire chief saying we're at a structure fire. I think there's great communication between myself and the staff. But what I've tried to create is an environment where they're working together as much as they are working with me. So part of the staff meetings is not only for me to be able to communicate to my staff what I'm doing, but it's an opportunity for them to share with each other what they're doing. And it's a huge effort that serves us well, such as closing of a street during a construction project, needing public safety assistance at, say, the Council on Aging or the library for different events. So that team approach, it served us well getting through difficult times. And I think when you come out the other side, you can look at each other across the table and say we did it together. So I know that may come up again in some other questions, but when we went through difficult times several years ago with some major cutbacks, those choices and those decisions were team decisions. They were certainly my decision at the end of the day to live with and die with, and what I brought to the Board of Selectmen and to the voters. But I went over those decisions with my staff and got their input, because the ones that were going to be impacted the most by the cuts were the people on the front lines, and that's my department heads and their staff. So in addition to that, maybe I'll catapult into the communications with the board.
Yep.
So I guess it's the same. We have with personality-wise, I have different selectmen, and occasionally there's some changeover and different folks with different styles. I have one gentleman who comes to selectmen's meetings on Monday nights, and Tuesday morning he travels, and I don't see him again until the following selectmen meeting. So we're in constant communication via text or email. And then I have other selectmen that work in town, and they're in my office every day. So communication is the most important skill that I need to have with my staff, but also with the board and also with the public. With the board, they need to be coming into a meeting fully informed on what they're going to be discussing, and that's my job. Most folks like yourselves have other jobs, other careers, and it's my job as the operations manager during the day to make sure the ship is smooth sailing, but at the same time let them know issues before they arise or issues as they come up. So communication is essential. I think at the staff level, the board level. Maybe the last piece is talking about residents, voters.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to definitely maintain that as well. I've always, since I've been in my position, have maintained an open door policy. I have an open door. My assistant is, she will welcome folks coming in, and as long as I'm not meeting with someone else or running out and crunching on a deadline and then running out the door, I'll take whoever comes in the door, whether it's the media, whether it's a business owner that's angry because the construction project blocked his parking, someone about a tax bill, a water bill. The way I look at it is folks and residents, if they took the time to come up to town hall and knock on my door, it's the most important thing of the day for them. So I need to hear that and listen. So communication, but also listening is a key skill that I see necessary in the position. Obviously we do lots of other types of communication now with things changing over 20 years with different media outlets and different departments having different Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts and utilizing those media. But that's from, I guess, an internal organization, how we communicate, and also beginning to talk about how we communicate with the outside organization as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kane?
Could you please describe for us your experience with capital expenditure planning, implementation, and public buildings projects, and specifically any experience you have with the Mass School Building Authority?
Sure. When I was in Northbridge, going back 15 years ago now, again, wearing that hat of town planner in a small town, you end up taking on a lot of different tasks, and one of those was overseeing some building projects that we were funding through community development block grants. We did a lot of barrier removal, elevator construction projects, library, town hall. At that time, I was also assigned to sit on the building committee. We're building a brand new high school. So I was exposed at that time to the interrelations between contractors, your GC, your subs, your clerk of the works, if you will, the different folks on the board, in addition to different staff, superintendent that would be eventually using the space, looking through change orders and retainage. So certainly familiar with the aspects of building from that standpoint very early on into my career. And then as a town administrator, I'm responsible for developing a capital plan. We have a capital bylaw. We have a committee, representative of the Board of Selectmen, Finance Committee, and Planning Board. And we meet ostensibly in the fall and also in the spring in preparation for town meetings, looking at any free cash expenditures, free cash that we have available for different projects. We try to do as many projects as we can without borrowing and without asking the voters for debt exclusions. And we've done that in Spencer. Until recently, we did adopt a $19 million comprehensive road project, which was a debt exclusion. So I develop a 10-year capital plan. I go over with my staff every budget season. We have they need to be looking at the forecasting what, for example, when one fire truck is coming off and when another is coming on. So we try to stagger our borrowings if we're going to have any, stagger our debt exclusions if we're going to have any. The roads project that we just passed, I think one of the huge selling points of that was we had 2 debt exclusions coming off. So when we do go to borrow, those, the debt exclusion for the borrowing for the roads project won't have as much of a burden to the taxpayers because we have some debt from a school project and also a large open space purchase coming off. So from everything from capital planning to working with the capital planning committee to forecasting and working through the borrowing process. I have worked with MSBA, the high school. We have a regional school district, so it's a little different here, but I sat on the building committee for a high school, went through the statement of interest process with MSBA, toured the building with them, understand their process. Actually, we've gone through it twice, looking to do large building projects. So,
How about vertical and horizontal?
so horizontal, obviously, construction with road projects. We've
Or water, sewer, et cetera?
Yep. So I'll do roads first. So with roads, what we've tried to do again is try to be as, I don't want to say innovative. It's maybe not innovative, but again, looking at the taxpayers' ability to pay for certain projects, and when you have a long laundry list of things that you need, such as a new school or roads or water and sewer improvements, when you're dealing with 100-year-old clay pipe or whatever, I advise my staff to really chase after grants. And one of the things that we've been fortunate enough to acquire were 2 awards for, we're doing a $4 million Main Street revitalization project right now. It's just started construction a couple weeks ago. And later this summer, we'll start another $5 million project, Route 31, which connects Spencer South to Route 20. Those are being funded through TIP projects. And I can tell you they take years and years and lots of effort and sweat to get funded. But when they do, it's a pretty good feeling. $9 million in 2 projects, along with the $19 million for the comprehensive road project is a big accomplishment, I think, for staff and I. Other projects that we've done from a horizontal standpoint, we've done some park improvements, again, through grants, through veteran services.
How about water?
Water and sewer, we have public water and public sewer in town. About 40% of our residents are on sewer. Our water department is very proactive. They have separate elected water commissioners, they're enterprise funds with separate commissioners. Very proactive in terms of capital planning, efficiency planning, and they put money every year towards doing some work. We did, I think about 5 years ago, as part of the ARA funding, if you recall, when that was coming through, we jumped all over that, and we were able to receive $2 million off of our $8 million borrowing for a new water tank. So we divided our town into a high-pressure system and a low-pressure system, and we developed a new state-of-the-art water tank on town property. In addition to that, about a mile's worth of new water line. A couple years ago, the sewer department, we worked on another borrowing, which was for an upgraded pump station. So familiar with those projects, and again, as you are with municipal vertical projects, going through bids and RFPs with contractors, and I'm very familiar with and had a lot of experience with that. So
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. LeBeau?
Thank you, Mr. Gaudette. Could you talk to us a little bit about, I guess, your philosophy, how you handle collective bargaining? Is it something that, particularly negotiations themselves, do you like to go in with the department head? Do you like to take counsel in? Do you like to go in by yourself? How do you handle that?
I've been fortunate enough, again, I think going back to that team approach that I was talking about early on, when I first came in, when I was hired March 1st, 2010 to be the town administrator, after the falling out with the previous town administrator, I had 6 weeks to develop the budget, the warrant, and do 4 collective bargaining agreements. At a time where we had just received those 9 C cuts, infighting on the board, and my wife was pregnant with my 3rd child, who was born about the 3rd week, about halfway through that. So the way I look at it is, if I can do it then, I can do it anytime. But I think, so from that early on point, again, of going to staff and saying, listen, we have to do a lot real quick, and we have to recover real fast, in an environment that was very difficult, understanding that it would be a team approach. Not only the department heads bought into that, but I leave the staff as well. So we worked through those 4 collective bargaining agreements, and then I've done probably 12 to 15 since then. One of the things that we had to do during the recession was we had to get out in the forefront of certain things that were structural problems for our budget, and one of those was health insurance. So shortly after those agreements were closed, in, say, my first and second year, after that, I approached all of the unions and explained to them that 80-20, 80% town contribution, 20% staff was just not sustainable if we were going to try and maintain jobs. We were able to negotiate, and over a 3-year period of the next contract, phase all of the units and eventually the personnel bylaw people as well to 60-40. A huge savings for the town, shifted some burden to the employees, but they understood that the environment was such that something had to be done. I did it without council and without department heads being in the room. Again, it's a team approach. That's not saying if I had to, I would. I certainly would, knowing I can lean on my staff for certain things. I think when we start talking about shift differential or certain aspects of the specifics of a police union contract, I'll bring in the chief and we'll have meetings and discuss that. But when we're talking financial terms, other terms, difficult discussions, it's myself. But I've been fortunate, again, I think, to foster that team approach. There's definitely give and take on both sides. And I've not had one arbitration case with any of my unions. I've been fortunate enough, again, to have people that get it, understand there's a job to do, and we need to work together to do that. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Again, the style, I guess, is team approach.
Yeah. So, you know, as manager, obviously, you have many different constituents, all coming from different perspectives, Board of Selectmen, citizens, staff. So could you tell us about a time when you had a situation or a subject where two people or more wanted you to take opposing positions on a subject? Maybe tell us a little bit about the subject and then how you handled it and how you maintained sort of your fairness and objectivity in that.
Well, I think there are times, certainly, when I have Board of Selectmen that disagree on certain things. And then going back to even the town planner days, you have times where you have two neighbors disagreeing over whether your shed's on my property or not. So everything from the smallest detail to something like that, to the largest detail of adopting a budget for the Board of Selectmen, having different priorities in mind. Again, it goes back to the team approach. And it goes back to even people who don't really know each other that well, trying to build a consensus where not everybody is going to get what they want, but at the end of the day, it's something they can live with. So I've had Board of Selectmen disagreements over budget priorities and have had to deal with that. It's usually myself discussing their priorities and understanding and trying to walk them through the pros and cons of their viewpoints and as well as the other. And I think it's the same when you're dealing with two residents, looking at different viewpoints and trying to get the other to understand each other's viewpoint and trying to come up with a compromise that everybody can live with. I think it's myself as a planner, going back to the beginning of my career and having many public workshops, doing different things involving the public, and trying to put forth an idea that I think is something the town should be looking at. You know, I try to have that, maybe not always build the maximum amount of consensus, but at least get people to understand all aspects of a project. But probably the most stressful one that I dealt with was a disagreement over whether or not we were to retain a DPW director. And it certainly had a divided board. It affected staff. We ended up making the change, and it was a stressful time. And sometimes things don't go your way. As a town administrator, my job is to facilitate, is to bring people to the table, have the discussions, the hard discussions, and at the end of the day, it's either the decision for the majority of a Board of Selectmen, sometimes 2/3, or town meeting. And again, my job is to be objective. My job is to, and this comes from the planner side of me, where I'll lay out option A, option B, and option C, and let the board or the voters understand the pros and cons to all those different options and let them decide. And sometimes it's not the one I would have chosen, but my job is to get them to the point where they make a decision, a well-informed decision, back to communication, and the decision is them.
Could I follow up?
Sure.
What might you do in that scenario where you do feel differently, and you feel that your board is really going down a path that is not just a wrong decision in terms of minor impact, but it might actually have a major impact on the community or residents?
Sure, I think it's, going back to, I think, the $19 million road project, one of the things I had 6, 7 public hearings. I mean, you meet as much as you can and in as many ways as you can to try and get someone to understand really the impacts of a certain vote or a certain decision. But then again, it's not my decision. I can only do what I can to get them to the point where they have an informed decision, and at the end of the day, someone is going to vote the way they see fit. I don't take it personal. It's not my job to do that. My job is to be objective, facilitate, and get people to at least have the information in front of them. At least if I've done that, I can walk away from that scenario saying I did everything I could possible to let them understand what the impacts of a certain decision were going to be. And if they still made that decision, which I felt was maybe a detriment, again, I don't get a vote. But I'll do my best to certainly get them the information. If I walk away from that scenario and I can look back and say I didn't give them information, that's something I need to look at in terms of moving forward. So being at the point in my career, I think I'm learning every day. You learn from your successes, but you obviously learn more from sometimes things that don't go well. So you need to learn that moving forward to the next time, what you could do differently.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Obviously, school budget is a big part of our budget. I'm sure it is in Spencer. Ours is about $64 million. Could you just describe your experience and familiarity with school budgets?
Absolutely. I think the benefit of being a small town administrator is I am really deep into the finances of the community. I do the budget. I don't have a finance officer, if you will, that does the budget. The budget is mine. I do it. I go in front of the finance committee, revenue forecasting. I do, again, the collective bargaining, contracts, procurement, work with staff in developing priorities within their budgets. And the budget that goes to town meeting usually is my budget after it's been reviewed by the finance committee and adopted by the Board of Selectmen. I get involved heavily in the recap tax process, and a lot of other different aspects of the finances. One thing I didn't realize that I was going to get into when I started as a town administrator was how much I would learn about school budgeting. If you follow the paper, several years ago, the Spencer East Brookfield Regional School District, back in the fall of 2012, had a new superintendent at that time and had some mismanagement, if you will, within their budgeting, which led to a $2 million deficit mid-year. Certainly learned how to budget for schools and what that balances between towns real quick. Department of Education came in eventually on December 1st and set a budget after there were several failures to adopt overrides and adopt budgets to balance the budget at town meeting. Department of Education came in. I worked closely with the Department of Education on what the impacts would be of any decision that they had. And then that eventually led to some cuts on the town side. So since then, I'd say the last 5 years, I've really dug deep into school budgeting, very familiar with the municipal local contribution formula, municipal growth factor formula, understanding what target share means. And I believe Schusberg is no different than Spencer in such that the municipal local contribution is increasing at a rate higher than your revenues are. For us, our revenues with 2.5 in state aid, we can say we pretty much average about 3% per year in revenues, everything being equal. And then when the municipal local contribution, you get the word from Department of Education on March 1st or so that the mandated increase of minimum local contribution is going to be 5%. You're already looking at cutting on the town side if we even had to get a school budget from the regional school district. That's just knowing what the mandate is going to be. So for us, we're not where the state wants us to be in terms of target share. So they're shifting us on top of the usual increase to the foundation budget and net school spending. They're adding that target share on top. and that's a killer for us. Never mind transportation costs when they go up. We are fortunate enough to have regional school transportation aid, but that doesn't keep up with the cost as well. Certainly, they don't fund it 100% when they originally told us they were going to fund it at 100%. So very familiar with the budgeting. I work very closely with the superintendent and business manager. I can tell you in the 7 years I've been a town administrator, I've worked with 5 superintendents and 4 business managers. Seems every year I'm starting over with a new group. A lot of turnover on the school committee. So the one stable aspect of that whole time period has been myself and several Board of Selectmen members, and maybe 1 or 2 school committee members. And you're also dealing with a regional school, so I'm dealing with another Board of Selectmen that doesn't have a town administrator, so they lean on me a lot. Another finance committee, they don't have a town administrator, they lean on me. And a school committee that's multiple towns. So I certainly didn't think I was going to learn as much about schools as I did. I'm glad I did. I come in every budget season looking at the balance between the town and the school. We're also part of a vocational regional school district, a 10-town regional school district at Southern Worcester County, known as Bay Path. And that was the best thing that we ever did. Bought in. We weren't one of the first towns we bought in, so we had to pay capital buy-in along the way. But we don't tuition out any of our vocational students. We're part of a regional school district program, and that's worked out very well. So I have a very close relationship with the superintendent of Bay Path and the business manager there as well. There's only been 2 business managers and two superintendents there, but so there's stability with them side. But I've also been at the forefront of out-of-district vocational transportation tuition, if you're familiar with that, with the agricultural schools. One of the things that can kill a budget of our size is on April 1st, when you get wind that a student's been accepted at Smith Vocational or Norfolk, and now you have to pick up that kid with a bus at his door and drive him 45 minutes one way across the state. It's a great opportunity for children. I think what we've really struggled with is that impact that it can cost $65,000 to transport one child on a yearly basis. And you don't find out until after you close your warrant. So I've tried to work with Senator Ann Goby and the Joint Committee on Education to try and look at changing the legislation regarding out-of-district tuition and transportation, mostly the transportation side. As you know, school choice, if you decide to apply and accept for school choice, the parent owns the transportation cost. Without a district vocational head, the town owns it. So it's very familiar with school budgeting, if you will.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Fitzgerald?
Sure, round 2. So I'd like to talk a little bit about our liabilities. Schusberg has been fortunate that we're in a unusual position whereby our pension liability will likely be paid off within a few years. I think we're one of a handful of communities across the state. That hasn't come easy, though. This year alone, the amount of money from our budget is approximately $5.5 million. Given that's approximately $120 million, give or take budget, we're talking between 4.5% and 5% of our total budget going to that liability. That being said, I'm glad we've done it. It's the right thing to do. However, that's only one part of the equation. We are, as soon as we are in a position to realize we have potential $5 or $6 million of extra money, we have, of course, the OPEB liability, which is a greater number than the number we started with our pension liability. So the question comes to us, what are we going to do about it? You know, are we going to just pivot and put that same exact amount of money back into the OPEB liability, outstanding liability? Or might we approach it a little bit differently? I'm not suggesting there's a right or wrong answer here, but I'd like to hear your opinion and someone who's been a town administrator and knowing how difficult it is to keep every one of those line item budgets where it was the year before and not lose ground to it.
Sure.
So that's where the question for today.
Well, I can tell you're probably the envy of many towns that you've put yourself in a position where you are tackling the problem in such a way. Certainly the towns, Central Mass, that I'm most familiar with, smaller communities, don't have that luxury of being able to tackle their pension benefits or their OPEB in that manner. A lot of towns are doing it with reserves. So one of the things that we're looking at is our free cash that we get every year. We're looking at adopting policies that will say a certain amount will go to capital, a certain amount to OPEB, a certain amount to pension, and there'll be some forecasting associated with that. This will be the first town meeting coming up. We have an article on the warrant that will actually be putting money towards OPEB. Unfortunately, we just haven't had the environment that we've been able to do that. Even though our bill is not as high as yours, we just haven't had the room in our budget structurally to do that. So starting with the 9C cuts in 2009, following that with the recession, carrying through those couple years, and then our regional school district collapse. We had one of the things I forgot to mention, when the Department of Education came in, they mandated that we paid $700,000 higher bill with additional local contribution mid-year on December 1st. So for us, that was an 8% of our budget, if you will. So we took all of our free cash at that point just to get through those next 6-8 months. And then the following year, we had to make reductions when an override failed. So we haven't been in a fortunate enough situation where we've had sufficient reserves or sufficient revenues that we can structurally make a decision within our operating budget to do that. And I don't think we're very different than a lot of other Central Mass towns struggling to make those ends meet. So we envy you, and I think you're in a great position. I think you should continue to do that. What you do after the fact, or how you do that, there's going to be a forecasting analysis that needs to be done. There'll be a policy decision that the board will have to make, recommendations for town meeting, finance committee, and a lot of analysis to be done once those efforts are paid off and what those monies should be used for. I'm sure you have different departments coming after that money once it's paid for. So that's going to be a policy decision. Probably some Saturday morning meetings with the finance committee and others in terms of where we go forward with those types of decisions. But again, I think that'll be a group decision. I can't answer without having some analysis of what your other needs are. My understanding is that there's an elementary school that's on the horizon, in addition to other capital projects that you will need. I know one of the things that we're looking at doing is a wastewater treatment plant. Those things don't come cheap. I think back 40 years ago, there was, like a lot of times throughout history, there's been a lot of state incentives to do different things, and then the state incentives aren't there anymore. And with certain mandates that we have to improve our treatment, we'll be looking at a new wastewater treatment plant, just like Blackstone Valley did several times in the last several years, and I know Oxbridge is going through it now, and others. So those are the types of things that you want to forecast and look out what your long-range capital needs are going to be, and then how you're going to handle that. If you can do that within your operating budget, plan for capital, plan for borrowing without debt exclusions, certainly you're going to make your taxpayers happy, but I don't know if you can do that yet without really taking a good look at your budget.
Okay, great, thanks.
Good. Mr. King?
Two-part question, if you would. How do you approach change of almost any type, in the shadow of a long-serving, well-respected town manager who will continue to reside in town? In the current situation, you describe a bit of a gong show. You take the job.
Yep.
You know, tumultuous times can be good at some point. I don't think we're in a tumultuous period of time. So how do you go about dealing with the question of change so it doesn't become change for the sake of change in the environment I've described?
So what I would like to say is that on top of it being a challenge, I know for all the three candidates that you're looking at, there's definitely going to be some challenge in terms of some changes that we are, more so than we're familiar with our own committee, such as either size of budget, size of staff, expectations. On top of that, following in the footsteps of a 20-year town manager who followed in the footsteps of a 40-year town manager, there's certainly some high expectations. I wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't think I was up for the challenge. That being said, I can't do it by myself. I definitely will be leaning on the Board of Selectmen, other town departments, town boards, citizens, and certainly department heads to help through that transition. Transition doesn't happen overnight. I think most town administrators, when they come in, unlike the situation I had, will be able to have an opportunity to develop, say, a 120-day plan or a 100-day plan where you can come in and you vision what types of things you want to do in those first 100 days. obviously meeting with staff and meeting with citizens and having meetings at the senior center and other types of relationship opportunities. You certainly are going to be a sponge when you first come in, and that's probably your most important skill from the beginning. And then again, I expect that I would do the same, and I would try and foster that team environment. And that changes, if we're going to succeed as an organization through that change, it's not Adam Gaudette on your own. It's a transition time period with collaboration from a lot of different people. And again, my job as a town manager is a facilitator, bring people to the table, force certain conversations to occur that need to happen, and help the individuals that are involved in the decision-making process to get through those processes, being well-informed. Change won't happen overnight. Transition won't happen overnight. There'll be high expectations. I wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't want it, feel like I was up to it. But that being said, knowing I'm going to need your help in addition to a lot of other folks. So one of the things that Schusberg obviously is well known for, not only Dan, but certainly the staff that you have here, is first class. So as a town manager looking to go to a community, making a change, career move, if you will, to walk into a situation where you have staff as capable as yours, that's certainly one tool in my toolbox that I look forward to using.
Great. Just a quick follow-up. What book are you currently reading?
What book am I currently reading? The autobiography by Bruce Springsteen.
Very good.
Okay. Mr. LeBeau?
You mentioned in your resume, and actually you already had a question, and you spoke about budget development. Could you talk particularly about the reserves that the town, you note the growth of reserves during some times when you've had to make some tough decisions about spending and how you were able to achieve what you've achieved?
Sure. So again, from a finance standpoint, we're looking at tight budgets, restrictions. Forecasting is a key part of the development process. I really take a close look at our local receipt revenue, if you will, understanding that along with our new growth provides an opportunity for us to generate some additional revenue in the following year if you budget correctly. Purpose for that is for us is that all of our capital spending happens outside of the budget, happens with reserves. So maintaining a healthy level of free cash that Department of Revenue would like you to see in that 5% range, if you will, is certainly something we strive for every year. So I think the low point, when I first came in, we were first dealing with some of the cutbacks, the school department issue. I think our free cash was a low of $200,000. The last 3 years, it's been at about $1 million. So for us, that's key because one is we balance our budget. One opportunity, we have a fall special town meeting, so we have a second chance to look at the budget. So we'll adopt the budget in May. 6 months go by, state finalizes their numbers in July. You get your new growth certified in the fall, audit, and then we have an opportunity to figure out if we've had additional costs that have come up during those 6 months, how we will manage them. In addition to that, we then have the follow-up in the Springtown meeting to balance the budget. For us, snow and ice is usually a killer. Like a lot of other towns, we underfund it within our operating budget. Unfortunately, we're taking free cash in the spring, and if we've had a very light winter, we have more for capital. If we have a winter, even this could be considered a moderate one, we're still dipping in our free cash reserves to put towards snow and ice. That's less money for capital. So we need to maintain that healthy reserve of free cash. And we do the same thing, retained earnings for our enterprise funds. In addition to that, our stabilization account, we've been able to maintain and not dip into it once. Again, $1 million is about 5% of our $20 million budget. We've maintained that from 2010 to now. Not once going into it. Not once when we had $700,000 hit from the Department of Education mid-year, the 9 seat cuts, overrides failed, other things. We have not dipped into it. Knowing that when we do have borrowing, our bond rating is very important to us. So we try to maintain a healthy level of stabilization and a healthy level of free cash, maintain ourselves for a good financial position. Looking at what happened in several years ago with tornado in Munson when it wiped out their town hall. Other things that can happen in New England. Making sure we have some emergency money available is also important. So we've been very frugal, very patient, and that's every budget process is looking at that in the background.
Thank you.
Okay, you.
Adam, you live in Sturbridge?
Correct.
Work in Spencer?
Yes.
So could you talk a little bit about how you manage to successfully sort of, I know you've been the administrator in Spencer for almost 7 years, and prior to that 2 years, so you've been doing that for some time. So could you talk a little bit about how you approach that, how you successfully manage that scenario where you actually don't live in the community? And an earlier response, you mentioned a text from the fire chief,
sure.
I think at 3:30 in the morning. So could you expand a little bit about how you address those particular scenarios?
Sure. So I think when I went into the planning career, the municipal career, if you will, 18 years ago now, I think my family, my wife, most importantly, accepted the fact that municipal government and working in that field is a way of life. Night meetings, Saturday morning meetings, texts at all times of the day and night regarding certain critical issues, and certainly the position I am now, a lot more issues come to the forefront where there's a need for that type of communication. Municipal government's 24/7, and it's something that my family and I accept. And these days with email, I can check my email sitting at breakfast on a Sunday morning if I want to. I can do it from my phone in the car, sitting on a train on the way to Boston if I'm going to MMA or other. So municipal government is, it's a way of life, and it's something that we've accepted. And again, I have a great relationship with my board and my staff, that if there's something I need to know, they can text me, call me at any time. When I'm working for the town of Spencer, it's 110%. If they need me there on a Thursday night till 10 o'clock, I'll be there. I miss a lot of Little League games, but that's okay, because the fact that I live in an area where I grew up, I've lived in that area for 35 years now. I have a great family support system, and my kids have a great network. It's essential to have that family network and friend network, knowing that when I'm out at a night meeting, we have support, my wife and I, because I have 3 kids, so she can't be in 3 places at the same time. So it's essential to have that network where I am. That being said, Spencer's, at any point in time, I'll be there for them. And my board knows that, and my staff knows that. So, communications change. It's changed over 20 years. So with texts and emails and, I could do, when a snowstorm in town halls happens to be closed that day, I can sit at my desk and access my files, and I can do work from home. So it's a close commute, 15 minutes. Here is about 25 minutes, out traffic. I spend a lot of time out this way. My kids, a lot of activities are out this way. So, when you're parenting through, kids in this day and age, being in the car is not uncommon, and being away from home is not uncommon. So I do rely on that network.
So not living in the community, how do you go about, sort of getting to know the residents and what they're about, what their needs and desires might be?
I haven't heard once in I've been there 9 years, almost 9 years, 8.5, 7 as town administrator. I haven't ever heard once that it's a problem that I live somewhere else in town. Again, that open door policy that I have, I'm very approachable. People can walk into my door at any given time. Even with email, it's not, I don't live by that rule, but if I send an email on a Saturday night because a business owner had a concern about something, they're thankful that I took the time out of my day to respond to them. Don't get a lot of those, but you do occasionally. So, again, it's a way of life. I have that open door policy. I've gone to the Fish and Game Club for a meeting. I've gone to the Senior Center for a meeting. You have to get out of your office and get out to see people. Every day at lunchtime, I walk out of my office and I go downtown. So I do my dry cleaning downtown. I go to lunch downtown. On Mother's Day, I buy the flowers downtown. All those types of things. People see me down the street, and they wave. It's a good feeling. Yes. I go to the post office for my own personal stuff, and I'll be stopped there, and people will pull me aside and talk. Be sitting at Spencer just isn't in Spencer. I was at a play in Boston, and somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, I see you on TV. I live in your town. I have a question for you." So I have never heard once that living in a different town is an issue. When they need me, I'm there, and they know that. And I think that the citizens know that, even more than the board knows that. The citizens know that. I'm pretty approachable. They can ask me a question anytime, and I've always tried to maintain that, and it's served me well.
Thank you.
So Shrewsbury obviously has a much bigger budget,
Yeah.
much bigger population. What do you see as the biggest issue that you'd be dealing with moving from Spencer to Shrewsbury?
Well, I think with a budget of that size, there's a lot of, obviously, there's more staff. So with that, I think there's probably going to be more human resources issues than we may have. We have 65 full-time employees, so that's something that would take a look at and when I came in terms of how you handle your personnel issues and your HR. In addition to that, I think one thing that, even though your budget is larger, that comes along with that is the staff resources that you do have to tackle that. And a small town administrator, you know, I have a part-time secretary, and we have full-time duties. So even though you're maybe going, the numbers may be an increase, to me, it's just a number. It's not an overwhelming number that I don't think I can handle. It's a number of knowing that you may lean on your staff in different scenarios more so than you would knowing that you know, the department is police department's a lot larger, or the highway's a lot larger. You have more unions to deal with, so there are going to be things that take up more time. But also the position, the town manager has an assistant town manager position, also has support staff in the office, as well as the Board of Selectmen. So again, being able to walk into an organization that has high demands, high expectations, but also has more resources than I'm used to, is certainly, I think, a blessing coming in. And that it'd be nice to walk in an organization where you have those types of support staff and systems in place that can handle such a budget of that size and handle a staff of that size. I think in a small town, what you find yourself with budget restrictions and resources that your staff and yourself are probably doing more so than maybe in a larger town. A town planner, for example, in a town of Framingham may be just the historic preservation planner. In a town planner in the town of Spencer or Northbridge, where I was, you're the historic preservation, you're the environmental planner, you're the economic development planner, you're everything. So I look forward to the opportunity to have a bigger team to tackle bigger budget.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sherrill?
So, because you've been kind enough to stand here for 55 minutes and ask a lot of tough questions, I'm going to throw you a softball. In fact, maybe it's even a beach ball, all right? That's how big it is. I noticed in your letter to us on March 3rd, you stated that you received a number of awards, one of them being the 2013 Community Service Award for regionalization efforts. A little later on, the Central Massachusetts Regional Stormwater Coalition, which you had a big part of. Why don't you tell us about the things that you've been happy to be a part of?
I appreciate you bringing that up. So again, when the environment that I was walking into, and I think a lot of town managers, town administrators during the past so many years, not that regionalization is a new concept, had to look at how we structure our budget and what things we could do differently. So I've had a lot of succession planning in place with staff. I've replaced 7 of my 12 department heads due to retirement. And a couple of those, we had to look at other options, and that was privatizing or regionalizing. So after I left, we regionalized the town planner, privatized our human resources, and privatized our IT. Just taking a closer look and studying and analyzing certain services and to look at how we could do things differently, understanding the issues that we had within our budget. Regionalization is another way to tackle those problems. One of the first regionalization effort that I undertook was the Central 13, which was actually an economic development project. And I actually copied the Metro West 495 compact study that you guys were part of. I saw a presentation on that, and I said, we need to be doing something like that to the west of Worcester. Because economic development is a regional issue. Going back to my days on the Economic Development Committee of the Blackstone Valley Chamber of Commerce, If every town is fighting for that one project to come in their town and they're working against each other, that's not always the best thing. So looking at it from a regionalization effort or opportunity was that why don't we look at regional opportunities within our region? Because if a company opens up 1,000 employees in Auburn, 20 of them could be from Spencer. That's a win for me, even though it's not in Auburn. So having that mindset of a regional aspect of benefit, that was the first grant I wrote. It was, through CMRPC. I have a very close relationship with CMRPC. I sit on the Legislative Affairs Committee. And so that was the first effort, 13 towns. And then what came out of that, when Governor Patrick introduced the Community Innovation Challenge grants back in 2012, one of the things that some of our smaller communities and larger communities facing with EPA mandates to tackle the MS4 issues, certainly at that time, in 2009, 10, 11, we were losing revenue. State aid was less, local receipts, people weren't buying as many cars, excise tax, all these things that impacting your budget, and now you have this mandate to add to your budget. So through that grant cycle, we created, at that time, I think it was 17 towns, and now it's up to 32, and if Fitchburg comes on next year, it'll be 33 towns. So that's pretty exciting that you can get 33 towns to do anything together, sometimes 2 towns. but I think it's, you had the impact of a shared problem, tackling it with the same problem of limited resources, and then a great network of staff. I mean, everyone from Brad Stone here and other folks that I've worked with, getting to meet other towns, obviously town administrators I know, but getting to meet other engineers and DPW directors and conservation agents. It's not just stormwater when we meet. Those are opportunities to network and walk out of that room and talk about something else. I know one of the things that came out of that was a shared salt bid, for example, with the DPW director. So, yeah, I think the regionalization efforts that we've undertaken and some privatization is just trying to be as creative as possible, understanding that we don't have a lot of new revenue coming in to tackle our problems. So you have to think differently. And that's why we got out in the forefront of health insurance early on with our unions. Going back to that, we adopted the 32B change last year. Again, working with unions and having no issues, understanding the environment that we're in. So we've had to be as creative as possible. I think it makes the job exciting. Coming in and understanding every day is a challenge. You're faced with a different challenge every day. Some of the same challenges, but I'm expected to come up with possible solutions to problems. And sometimes you have to be innovative at the forefront, and other times you have to take a risk.
Thank you. Other questions, Mr. Kane?
Just a quick one. Sure. You've spoken extensively about the specifics, the budget management, the focus on the forecasts. Given that the tactical can consume a week and a half of any town manager's job, how do you push yourself away and find time to think more strategically beyond the immediate fiscal year, the need to plow snow, et cetera, so you're thinking 1 year, 3 years, 5 years out?
Well, what I've learned over 7 years in this position, there is no slow time. You think the summer's going to be slow, and it's not. You think Christmas break's going to be slow, it's not. There's always something to do. So I think that's the planner in me, even though I have a town planner, and planning is certainly not an essential function of my job. It's something that's a skill that I need to maintain, and I think that's why you see a lot of town managers or former town planners. It's a good skill to have, having that analytical approach, the cost-benefit analysis, the forecasting, all those types of things go into possible solutions to different problems that you need to take a look at. And you have to think outside the box. I have a standard calendar like everyone else. So we're going to open the warrant at this point, budgets are due at this point, we're going to close the warrant at this point, finance committees, same thing in the fall, we have fall town meeting. So every town manager probably has that same calendar in some fashion. So you're right, you need to find time to do other things. And you also need to find time to balance your life at the same time.
How do you do that?
Well, I think when I'm home, it's 110%, and when I'm at work, it's 110%. You know, my family needs me just as much as Spencer does. So some days I can't be there at home, and my family knows that. And when we are together, it's awesome. You know, so you know, being a parent and raising kids is just awesome. So that's where I find the joy and excitement outside of work. You know, I do have hobbies. I know Mrs. Miller, or I think it was Mrs. O'Connor, asked me what my hobby is. So, yeah, I like the quiet morning fishing by myself on a kayak is you know, a way to get away from everything, and just forget about work and things like that. But I'd say any night that I'm not here working or at town hall working, I'm probably driving a kid and watching a game, which is, you know, what's better than that? There's nothing better than that.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we're just about at the end of the time. Do you have any questions for us before we wrap up?
Well, I
Or
think,
make any last comments?
Yeah, just I think the one question I have, again, is, and it was mentioned before, in terms of the transition and the change. And you had such great stability here. Certainly an envy of a lot of organizations coming in. So I guess my question is to the board, you know, expectations of a person coming in and filling those shoes. How has the board thought about their involvement or their efforts in terms of helping whoever comes into the position succeed in that transition process?
I think, at least I can speak for this board and previous boards, the boards have always been supportive of the manager. I think, and other people can speak to this themselves, but we view our job as running interference for the manager so the manager can do his or her job. So it's a supportive, not an activist board going in and trying to micromanage departments or anything like that. We respect the charter, we respect the position. So we're there to give as much help as you want and we'll give you as little as you want. Anybody else wants to add to that?
Just to add a comment that we've had town managers who did an awful lot themselves, and you described some of that in your own position. We think in certain cases, especially in cases of HR personnel matters and others, that we need to examine if that's the right policy going forward. We had some significant changes how we handled a lot of the legal aspects, where Dan did an awful lot himself and brought on legal advice. So I think that we're recognizing that with the town getting closer to 40,000 than 35, that we need to be in a position where we put the right resources to make whoever's in that position successful.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, you want to say it?
You want to say it?
May I? I think the town, the boards, I think my expectation would be that whomever the new manager is comes in. I mean, it is good timing from a calendar perspective. Town meeting will be done. We'll just be starting the new fiscal year. My expectation would be that the new manager takes the period through the summertime to acquaint himself or herself with what we've done here, to evaluate, to consider possibly new ways to approach things. But come Labor Day, I mean, we're really back at it. We begin the very beginnings of our fiscal policy development. We talk about the capital plan. We talk about public works. So I would think that the new manager could enjoy a summer, unless, you know, something unexpected happens. As we all know, that can happen at any time. But I think that would be a period of gaining understanding, and often one comes in and notices something that's odd, but if you're here too long, it's no longer odd. So that's a value for us to have someone come in with a fresh set of eyes and take a look. But in summary, in September, we're going to get ready to go through our normal calendar process to have a budget out in the early winter time and to move ahead to our town meeting. That would be my expectation. And the board would certainly be very, I believe, the board will be very supportive of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you know, I agree with everything that they've said, which is unusual. No, just kidding. But just, I think, you know, just to reiterate, I think what we expect is, you know, we aren't, as Mr. Paul said, hands-on. We're not in there every day, but we'll look to you to help us understand what it is you need. So I think what you can expect is that we're all here. I think one of the greatest things that we all offer is this a very stable board. So stability, so the new manager comes in knowing that, you know, you get a group of people here who have your back. So when there are times, you know, where you might need somebody to intercede, that I think is something that you could count on individuals on this board doing.
Thank you.
What's that?
Yeah, I have my own plan, but I'm not the manager. I would expect that the new manager would come in with a plan of how he or she will get to know the community, because people know they can see Dan at church, at Price Chopper, or in his office, because he's generally always there. So that would be one parallel track, but then you have to be ready to deal with the other parallel tracks of analysis of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're doing it. And while you're doing all those other two things, run the railroad. So, you know, I could do that, but frankly, that's not what I'm paid to do. So I'll remain on the board of directors and hopefully assist you, as my colleagues have described, in effectuating that type of a thorough and complete in the building, out of the building transition. But I'm not going to lie to you, I see that as mostly on the shoulders of the incoming manager to figure out how he or she is going to be successful, and then we can be the guardrails to ensure that happens. You stay on track.
Good. Okay, so Thursday you'll be back,
Yes.
meeting with the department heads.
Yep.
And then for a public meet and greet at 5:30.
Sounds great.
So we'll probably see you again then.
Great. Well, thank you
for
for
coming
the
in.
opportunity. Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
me.
Great.
I look forward
Thank
to seeing
you.
you on Thursday.
Okay. Great.
Thank you.
Okay, and we are back for our second interview this evening. Tonight, this segment, we have Robin Carver, the town administrator in Charlton. Craver. I had it written down right. Good evening.
Good
Welcome.
evening, sir. Thank you.
Would you like to start off by just giving us a little history of yourself, professionally and personally?
Yes,
Get to know you a little bit.
I'd be glad to. I'm a municipal administrator. I have been in the business for about 20 years. If you look at my resume, you can see that I had progressive positions, starting from having an internship in a town, to assistant town manager, to town administrator, to administrator here in Charlton. So I've been in a couple of communities. The community I'm in now is Charlton, and I've been there for 11 years. I think that I have significant managerial experience. I have strong communication skills. I'm competent in finance, economic development, strategic planning, personnel management. I'm accessible to the public with an open door policy. I live in Webster. I am married with 2 grown children. It's important to me to be involved in the community that I work in, and in the present community that I'm in, I've seldom missed parades and things like that. I have a proven track record in working with state agencies and our representatives to get things done, and hopefully as we move through, I'll have an opportunity to talk about some of those projects that I've done. I have excellent relationships with our select school committee and superintendent, and I understand the need to expand economic development, to expand the tax base, provide jobs, and to create good partnerships with our communities. I have a strong work ethic, and I would like to end my career as a town manager in Schusberg. I would commit 10 to 15 years. I'm looking only to move once. This is the first time that I've actually put my resume out since I've been in Charlton, and as I said, I've been there 11 years. I've had 2 communities that I've looked at that I would be interested in serving, and Schusberg is one of them. And I'd like to make one more move in my career and end here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to just work our way around the board and ask a series of questions. Take as much time as you need to answer them.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr.
So, Ms.
Fitzgerald.
Graver, thank you very much for coming this evening. I've looked over your resume. It's an impressive report that contains a lot of professional organizations and particular trainings you've had, and yet that's only part of the job. The bigger part of the job is the ability to get along with people, how to manage yourself in the context of a very mature town that we have in terms of town departments. So I'm interested in your communication style, your ability, your management style, so to speak, and how you might conduct yourself with regard to the department heads, how often you might meet with them, your formality with them, informality with how that might approach. Second part of that question has to do outside of the auspices of this brick building is the public. The public has very different demands. The way they want to communicate these days is very different than in the past, coming at you at very different angles and want immediate responses to things. So first part, talk about relationship with the department, people you'd be managing, and then that external relationship, if you would.
Yes, sir. Thank you. An excellent question. I have an open door policy. My managing style is felicitate. I've lost a syllable. Like I said, I am so nervous. Let me just shake this off for a moment. I did not expect this. I'm usually pretty calm.
This is the nice side of the table over here. So.
I like being on that side much better. All right, let me try again. I think I have a very open style of management. I think it's important as a manager to listen to your department heads, to understand what's happening in their departments, to understand the things they're doing well, and also the things that they need, resources and assistance they need to do their jobs well. I am not a micromanager. And one of the reasons that I'm attracted to Schusberg is that my understanding is that you have excellent professional staff, and I would like to be able to support them. So I tend to see my role as a supportive. I also tend to want to have clear goals. So, for instance, if I came here, I would be looking to work with the board on goals and objectives. Those goals and objectives would also be applied to my work with the departments. I think if you don't know where you're going, you won't be sure if you've gotten there or not. So clear direction, making sure people are trained and that they have the tools that they need. I've always encouraged all of the department heads to get as much training and be as active as they can in their associations. And I have an open, like I said, an open door policy. So if they need some assistance, it's important to be able to come to me. I do not socialize outside of work. You asked about my interpersonal relationships. I believe that it's a professional relationship. On the outside, I tend to have very strong relationships with residents. I can't tell you how many calls I've gotten saying, congratulations, good luck, sorry to lose you, but we understand. I see my role as a manager as trying to help facilitate the businesses in town, the residents in town, and everyone has certain issues that are important to them. And mine is to listen and see how I can assist.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Kane.
Good evening, how are you? Please describe your experience in capital expenditure planning, financing, and implementation, specifically within the Mass School Building Authority program.
Right now in Charlton, I am in a school district, so I'm not involved, but I have been in other towns, particularly in Georgetown. We had done a school building project. If you'll notice in my resume, I have my construction supervisor license. We've just finished building a highway operations facility that I was the project manager on. For capital planning, to go back to the planning component, I work with the departments. They give me their 5-year plan. I put that together. We go through priorities with the departments. I have monthly department head meetings where we're talking about what's coming up, and that goes back to Selectman Fitzgerald's question about working with the department, so there's never any surprises. So we put together a 5-year capital plan. We annually update it when I send out the budget message. I also ask for their priorities if we need to make any changes.
What's your history been on financing such projects? Borrowing, free cash?
We're finishing up a town hall project right now where we had gotten a CDBG grant to put in an elevator, and that project is finishing up now. I worked on the grant. We had actually written that grant a couple of times, weren't eligible because of our wealth had put us out of reach. I worked with the town of Leicester, and we put the grant in together as a regional, and we received the grant, and we were able to get 50% of our funding.
How about water and sewer experience?
Water, sewer, and experience. When I first came to Charlton 11 years ago, and I sat, one of the first things I did was sit with the Board of Selectmen and ask them what was the most important thing to them that I get done. When I started, they had some significant contamination in their town. And in the 10 years, what we've done is we've been able to negotiate a $30 million settlement with Exxon, and I was the lead negotiator for that. We have 8 miles. It's now grown to 8 miles of water infrastructure that will be put into the town of Charlton. We have been working with the town of Southbridge. I've negotiated 2 IMAs with them for water. The first was for 100,000 gallons per day. The second was for 500,000 gallons per day. And we are also now starting a master plan. I've gotten $200,000 in a grant from the state to do a water master plan, and we're looking at becoming a consecutive water system. Right now, Southbridge is supplying our water and operating the system, and we're looking at finding our own water sources as well as the possibility of just buying the water at the town line.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. LeBeau?
The town recently completed its third master plan process, and it's about to go into an implementation phase. Have you had any experience with that in any of the communities you've worked in?
Yes, we've done a master plan in every community that I've been in. We're about due now. We're doing updates. We do annual updates. The planning board has been mostly the driver of that. And I don't believe that a master plan is something that'll sit on the shelf. I think it gives you very good information, especially if you've got your community involved and you're doing your focus groups. It can become your roadmap as to finding your goals and objectives.
What would you see, you mentioned that the planning board was generally the driver. What would you see as the town manager's role?
The town manager's role, I think, would be to bring in the other components. The planning is looking at components as far as zoning. They may be pulling in some of the open space. I think the manager has some of the financial components and looking at the growth and how to build some of the systems, your infrastructure, and things like that.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Miller?
Robin, you mentioned earlier your role as a facilitator with various constituents, Board of Selectmen, residents, staff, et cetera. So can you possibly tell us about a time when you had a situation where you might have had 2 selectmen, 2 residents, whatever, who really wanted you to take very different sides or positions on something, sort of how you navigated that, and maybe tell us a little bit about what core values you have that sort of drive when you have to make those hard decisions.
Yes, I'd be glad to. One of the towns that I went into when I first got there, the board was split 3-2 on what was going to happen with the police department. There was a breakdown. When I got to the town, the police chief was out on paid administrative leave. The deputy was out on paid administrative leave. A sergeant was interim, temporary, provisional police chief. You had a sergeant that was out being investigated for civil service violation of cheating on a test. And we had a sexual harassment case against us. All of this is what I walked into. It's significant to say that the board was split, and there had been kind of sides taken on who was right and who was wrong. So there was a large division within the police department. There was a large division on the board. One of the things that we did was to have a judge come in and actually do a review of the department and make recommendations. I tried my best to work in the middle as far as I could. When the judge's recommendations came out, I implemented those recommendations, and by implementing them, some of the board members kind of lost some of the staff that they liked, and some of the board members weren't happy with some of the decisions, and I was aware of that. But I had gone into the department, and I had been working with the union, with the sergeants, and trying to listen and learn, also from the community. And I made those decisions based on, I had to hold some hearings, some discipline hearings, and I made the decisions knowing that I had tried to build consensus with everyone. It didn't necessarily work. But what I needed to do was to stand on my own convictions on what was the best for the town, what was the best for the department, and what would start to bring unity back. And I feel pretty good about that. I think that we did do that. We did have to let some people go. And I talked with the chief, and he retired, which was the best thing to do. So trying to negotiate a difficult situation, and I think we were successful.
What do you feel that you might have learned in that process? Anything you would have done differently?
I think the important role of a manager to work with a board of selectmen is to try and build consensus, to continually give the board information on what they can and how to make decisions. So for me, what I would have done was probably take a little more time with the board to make sure that they could see each piece that was really happening. Since then, in the last 11 years, I think I've learned from that, and that was 12 years ago, and I think that I've been able to implement that so that I've not had difficult board relations. As a matter of fact, if you check my references, you'll find that I think all the board members are quite happy, and we've had unity for 10 years.
Thank you.
Okay, could you discuss your experience and familiarity with school budgets?
Yes, sir. In Charlton, at this time, we receive a budget number from the regional school district. And then when I first came to Charlton, there was division, an us against them type of mentality between the school and the general government. I worked with the superintendent to put together what we would started calling the financial kickoff meeting, where we would have the town of Dudley, the town of Charlton, and the school district to sit down in a large meeting, bring in all our financial people, and actually share information. Because one of the things that we learned was listening. People weren't necessarily understanding each other and what each other's plights were. I've also worked in towns where the budget has been part of, the school budget has been part of the budget, and it's not been a school district. One of the reasons, and I had shared this in the screening committee, one of the reasons I'm interested in Schusberg is that I believe that you value education and you want to fund it, and I would want to come in and try to help maintain the excellence that you've created.
Just to follow up on that, what kind of relationship have you built with the superintendent?
I would say excellent. And he is one of my references, so I welcome you to have a conversation with him.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Fitzgerald.
So round two. As I asked the person who came before you a similar question, somewhat of a comment, Shrewsbury is very fortunate. We have outstanding liabilities like most communities do. But with regard to our pension liabilities, we're going to pay that off within the next few years, likely down to only $100,000 or so, certainly by year 3. However, in doing so, it's taken a disproportionately large portion of our operating budget to do that. This year alone, it's over $5.5 million. Put that in perspective, it's almost 5% of our budget. So we're very happy about that, and we think we've made the right decision. Going forward, though, OPEB liability is actually larger than our pension liability, and we're going to have to make a decision down the road how we attack that. I'm going to ask you a question. Given that we have this opportunity, that we'll have money that we didn't have prior, do we simply pivot and put it all back to an OPEB liability? Do we possibly break this up a bit and think about how we might use this more effectively in operations? I'm not suggesting that there's a complete right or wrong answer at this point, because it's an analysis that you haven't had a part of, so I'm giving you a little bit of a break on that. But that said, I'd like to get your thoughts and maybe ideas on just what kind of an opportunity that brings to us.
It's a good question. I'm glad you acknowledged that I haven't had a chance to study your situation at this point. I did, in my research for Schusberg, what I did notice is that you do have an aggressive plan, and you have been doing well in paying down your OPEB and your pension liability. I think it's prudent when you don't have money in your operating budget and you've been able to set that aside for capital, that you continue that. At 100% level, I would have to take a look at what the competing issues are. My understanding is that you do have some significant capital issues that you need to deal with, such as water lines and schools and other things. I would suggest that since you don't have that in your operating budget at this point, I would be looking at other capital. And again, I'm not seeing that in the review that I've done on your financials that you have a need for that at this time. And it does sound like you've had deferred capital issues. So I would probably be looking first to see what the priorities were in your capital and balance off continuing with the OPEB.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Kane?
How do you approach change, given that we're in a situation of a long-serving, well-respected town manager retiring and who will continue to live in town? How do you deal with that question of change in that environment?
Well, first I'd say I have a lot of respect for Dan. So I think he's been a good manager, certainly not living in town, but he has an excellent reputation, and all the interactions I've had with him, he's an excellent person. I think that there's an advantage to having the past manager living here. I would not, as a new manager, I would not come in and start to make change right away. That is not my style. My style is to come in and listen to see what the needs are of the town, where the departments are. So I would imagine that I would start out with that. Each of your departments are going to have their own thoughts about how change will come and how a different manager would actually work. I would work to try and unify them, get them working together, build consensus on where we're going, and I would like to be working on goals and objectives. I think if you have an open dialogue with the departments and they feel heard and they know that the manager understands where they want to go, you can get there easier and it's a smoother transition.
Thank you. What book are you currently reading?
Invisible Influence. I picked it up at the MMA conference.
Nice. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. LeBeau?
Could you talk a little bit about your history, experience, and your general philosophy relative to collective bargaining? Particularly, I'd like to hear, or specifically, I'd like to hear any arbitrations, JLMC, what your style is. Do you like to negotiate? Do you like to go in the room by yourself? Do you like to bring labor council with you? Do you like to bring the appropriate department head with you? How do you handle all that?
Okay. I am on the JLMC, so I am a member there of the management team. I've gone out to a couple of towns assisting them. My method is I do not use counsel. I generally do it myself. I believe that to start out on the right foot, you have to have a good relationship with the union president, and I work to have that. They need to trust that the manager is telling the truth. So I try to work on that. I try to make sure that they have the information as far as the background, the numbers. If we need to have salary surveys, statistics, things like that, I will gather that information. I will be honest and straight with them on where the town is financially, and recognizing that you still are working with trying to balance public safety with school and with clerical. Try to guard against one union being able to walk away consistently with a better contract.
How many units do you bargain with in Charlton?
Right now we have 4, police, fire, highway, and clerical.
And is everything settled right now, or are you in negotiations for some? Or?
I'm beginning negotiations with fire. Clerical is out. They changed from SEIU to an attorney, so that's kind of set us back a little bit.
And I'm sorry, you work with the JLMC. Have you had any arbitrations, and how have they gone?
No, I've not had.
Very good.
Mr. Miller?
Robin, so you live in Webster.
Yes,
Work in
ma'am.
Charlton. So tell us a little bit of how you manage that. I mean, you've been in Charlton for 10 years, so you've been doing that for some period of time. How do you make that successful, balance that? What are some of the challenges with not living in the community where you work?
I've done both. I've worked and lived in the community I work in, and I have worked and lived in another community. It's worked for me better living outside the community. I tend to be seen as an objective party. I don't get involved in politics. I don't think even if I lived in town I would get involved in politics. I have this sign in my office that says Switzerland. The travel is not very far. It's a half an hour. Actually, Charlton probably gets more time from me because I don't run home and come back. So when I get there, I stay there. If we have meetings, I just work straight through. I think it's helpful as a manager to be able to go to the grocery store or go to your church and not be, oh, can we talk about this and can we talk about that? So I think it supports the manager into having some downtime. And that's important. So when I'm on as a manager, and when I'm here, I am fully 100% here.
So not living in the community, how do you go about sort of knowing the people, understanding what their concerns are, issues? How do you get a sense of what the community is about?
One of the things that we did was we took the department heads on the road. So we had monthly department head meetings, and each department took on a month. And they went into the community and they found a conference room in one of the buildings, and we would kind of do a road trip on our department heads. That did a couple of things. For me, it helped me know the community, the business leaders, the owners of these companies. It also gave them an opportunity to see all of the department heads, put faces to names, and have the department heads have an opportunity to hear the businesses that are in town, what they do, what they focus on, where their goals are. And it's been a great program. So we did that the first few years that I had started there, and now we've actually reinstituted it. So last month was at Incom, one of our large manufacturing companies. I also tend to go to all of the parades and things like that. So if there's an event, I will go to it. I will walk around. I will be seen. And I get invitations to many things, and I go to them. In the evening, I will go. It's important to me to know the community and to be a part of it, and for the people who live here to believe and feel like I'm available and approachable.
Shrewsbury's budget and its population is a lot bigger than Charlton's. What do you see is going to be the biggest issue for you making the transition from Charlton to Shrewsbury?
Regarding the budget,
Regarding the budget, the operation of the town?
I'm not concerned about the budget. I think that would be fine. There's certain standard best practices on budgeting, and I think that those transfer, whether it's a $30 million or a $50 million budget. I think for the greatest transition for me, I'm not seeing a lot that I think will be different. I think that the work that I've been doing, and as I said in my opening remarks, I've gone through each community that I've gone through. If you look at, you've seen that I've been progressive in the levels of responsibility that I've taken on. And I'm at a point now in my tenure that I'm ready to take on some more responsibility. So it's a new community.
Okay. So, Mr. Gerald?
I happen to notice two things on your resume that jumped out at me as a little bit different that I'd like to talk to you about or have you answer for me. One of them is in the midst of the town administrator roles with Georgetown, Webster, and then in Charlton there was a 2-year stint where you became president and CEO of a company, R&R Development Company, which was quite a change.
Yes.
I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, what brought that about, and why the short nature of it. And then another thing that caught my eye on this was under papers and reports. I assume you contributed this, a decision to be courageous, a model, basic and applied social psychology. So take the first part first, and then tell me a little bit about what you had to do with this other part and what did it mean.
The first one, you've given me two separate questions. The
Yes.
first one was, just take me back to that.
Well, it's really to explain, you took a chance to leave town administration and go into something completely different, and you became president and CEO of that organization for a period of time, 2 to 3 years, then decided to go back into. So explain what that was about, what made you decide to get back into town administration.
So the example that I gave you about the police, when I walked into kind of a hornet's nest,
Yes.
that town, that was the town that I was in before I decided to start my own business. It was a very difficult town. It was very political. And at that time, it didn't really seem to make much sense of what I did to make changes. It just wasn't a good fit. I had the superintendent tell me when I had started there that don't worry about it if it doesn't work, because in this town it's a blood sport. I did not understand that until later. When I left there, and I left after a year and a half, I wasn't exactly sure I wanted to come back into this profession. It had been very difficult, and I learned a lot from it. But I decided to build houses, and I had plenty of project manager type skills, and I built 2 homes. And I might have stayed with it, except for we had the crash at the time. So I was actually helping a friend of mine in an election, and someone was standing next to me who was assisting the sheriff at the time, and said, "Oh, our town is looking for a town manager." So I said, just put it in. So I did. I put my resume in, and I've been there 11 years. I learned a lot from that other job. I'll just leave it there. But
Okay.
that's the history of it.
Well, thank you for your candor in that. And the second part, this
Yes.
profiles and courage, so to speak.
I was getting my master's in public administration, and we were actually, no, that's before the master's. This was when I was working on my my bachelor's at Hartford College for Women, I was in the Women's Studies program. We were looking at diversity. We were looking at what it takes to be altruistic. And what we focused on was the Holocaust and the people who had assisted people and risked their own lives to save people and hide them in their homes. And what was truly altruism versus what was a need or some benefit. And it was a very interesting analysis where some people thought that maybe they might go to heaven if they did this thing, so there was some benefit. And there were other people who had assisted in the Holocaust that had other ulterior motives. So we were really drilling down to say, what is it in a person that lends them to, with no benefit to themselves, to actually give? And it came down to empathy.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Kane?
You've talked a lot this evening about the specific budgeting approaches and experience you've had. Certainly in this position, as in your current position, there are endless tactical, operational things to do, next demand, etc. How do you deal with the need to think strategically on a more regular basis? How do you push away from all of those day-to-day demands to ensure that you and your senior staff are thinking 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years out?
I think that goes back to the strategic planning that I talked about, and I think that begins with my relationship with this board and working with you to find out what your goals are, and then trying to figure out, how do we have the departments move forward. So it's important to have the discussion with you, not just with the day-to-day things that are coming up in the crisis management, but to also make that time, at least annually, to sit down and take a look at what have we done in the years past, where are we going next year, and in that process, I will bring you information, and we will, take a look at the master plan, bring that into the strategic planning. But I really think it starts with you and the discussions that we have in moving forward.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr.
Mr. Magato's going to leave our employ on July 7th, and the new manager, the building will open again on Monday the 10th with a new manager. So could you, I'm sure as part of your process of making the decision to apply and preparing for tonight, you've thought a little bit about should the board appoint you. What do you see as, and except I understand that everything will change when somebody actually comes into the job, but as you project out, what do you see yourself doing on your first day, first month, first 6 months, first year? I mean, what do you see as steps along the way to integrate yourself into the community, into the organization, and how have you thought about that?
Well, I've talked a little bit about it already, which would be asking you to meet with me and go over goals for next year. So that would be one of the first things that I would want to do. I would call a department head meeting together and also meet one-on-one with the departments to get to an understanding and really listen. I think the first 100 days, first year, maybe first 2 years, is really to listen, to understand what do you have here, what's working well, what needs improvement, what resources do we have at our hands to be able to move us forward in the direction that you want to go. So I'm not about trying to come in and make a whole bunch of changes quickly, unless certainly if there's things that the board feels needs to be changed, I would address them immediately. I think that my hope would be to reach out to some of the community groups, go talk with them, be their speakers, get out to the public as much as I can. But I would be sitting down and I would be reading all of your bylaws. I've already done a bit of research on your financials, your Town Manager Act, certainly your posting. But I would be looking at your bylaws, looking at all the contracts you have, get myself familiar with what your employee contracts are. If you have a master plan now, if it's fairly up to date, I would still take a look at that. I would look at start to have conversations with your legislators and find out what has been some of the things that you've been trying to move forward that they see coming down the pike. I will develop relationships. I think that that's also something very important in my first year, is to start to develop relationships. I think one of the things that I do bring to the table for you is that I already have a lot of relationships in Worcester County, have being here, being successful. And also you can see in my resume all of the different agencies and groups that I've been a part of. And I do want to say that one of the ways that I've chosen which boards to be a part of has really been driven by the Board of Selectmen's goals and objectives on what needs to happen in town. So we had water and environmental issues, and that's why you see so much of my work in stormwater. The chair of the MMA's Public Energy and Environmental Policy. I've worked with CMRPC very closely on several different issues. So I would bring that here, but also I would start to adjust it for the areas that you need, which again, what I'm hearing is water and school building.
Not a follow-up, but a very quick, separate question. I note in your resume that you're the Chief Procurement Officer. Are you a certified municipal public purchasing official?
I am, and next month I go for my retraining in construction and contracting, so I'll be, by the time I would get here, I would have all those skills honed up.
Thank you.
So, in Shrewsbury here, we're very reliant on the residential property tax, and economic commercial development is always a priority for us. So could you speak a little bit about some of the work that you've done, or some of the experience you might have in Charlton or other communities, and how you might see approaching that and helping Shrewsbury to sort of move forward with some of our economic development plans?
Certainly. I did take a look at what your statistics are. I see that you do have you do not have a split tax rate.
Right.
You're about 87%, I think, residential. And there's a lot, and from what I also saw, there is one large tract that you have that you've been trying to market. We've been very successful in Charlton. We have, as we had talked about in the search committee, we have Treehouse Brewery coming in. We have several manufacturing companies that have come in. As we're able to install the water infrastructure, we're going to see in Charlton that kind of blooming. So I have several companies that have been coming to me already, having conversations about TIFs and pilots and just straight coming and what can they do. We just did our first 43D permit in Charlton. So I think I'm prepared to go out and work on your behalf to assist. And I do believe also that your assistant town administrator is planning. So having that in the department will certainly be helpful.
Okay.
Go ahead. That's mine.
Did you have a follow-up? No, go
No,
ahead.
it wasn't a follow-up. It's a separate question, but
go
I'll
ahead.
ask it next.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm just wondering, what would you describe, what do you absolutely love about your work and what you do? And on the opposite side, what just makes your hair hurt, as they say, or drives you crazy?
I think the part that I like the best is when I've done something and been able to help a resident and make their life better, or when we've had a project and a goal and it's completed. Like when I look back at the Exxon deal and negotiating it for 10 years that took. And I never once thought we wouldn't get there, but certainly when we've completed that project, that felt good. So I think getting things done. I am a doer, I'm a problem solver, so I like to have things completed. So at that moment that a project gets completed and I exhale, it's like, yes, okay. That also makes me go to the next one, okay, now what? What makes my hair curl? Sometimes I think a manager, by virtue of the authority that people perceive that they have, there's, I don't want to say a fear factor, but there's a hesitancy to really engage. So having an open door policy and continuing to try and make sure that people understand that I'm approachable. When I see that someone looks at the position, not me, but the position, and sees the principal versus the human being that's there to assist them, I think that's probably the piece that drives me crazy. But I don't stop there. I will work to help people feel comfortable and know that I'm approachable. But I think that's the one, because it's hard to shift that.
The next manager is going to be dealing with some department head turnover. Could you talk about what you'd be looking for in a department head and how you would mentor them or develop them as they come into the program?
Certainly. In Charlton, we've just had our treasurer, our collector, and our town accountant all retire in the last 2 years. So one of the things that we did, we took advantage of the attrition to consolidate some of the departments, so we're combining the treasurer collector. So I think the first thing that I would look at as department heads are retiring, is there any ability to have efficiencies, combine departments, any regional partnerships that might work. Not knowing who's retiring, it would be difficult for me to say, but those are things that I would have in my mind. If they are being replaced, we're also replacing a fire chief too. We've just hired our first HR director. Making sure that those positions are solid and the services are solid is important. If we were hiring someone new and they were new to their position, first of all, if at all possibilities, I'd like to hire people who have been in the job before. If they're not and they have good potential, I would be first to recognize that and bring them on, and then try to get them the training that they need to be successful. The last 2 hires that I've had, I've whispered after I've made the offer that my expectation is that you'll be the best in the state. And I really believe that Charlton has some of the best department heads in the state. They're very active in their associations, and that's one of the reasons I'm also interested in here, because I believe that that is similar between the 2 towns.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Maybe a general question. Robin, you described earlier that in one of the towns that they considered politics a blood sport. Caught my attention.
I might have said too much.
That is not Shrewsbury. However, we do have some difficult people. See different things. 2 people could look at the same sheet of information, same numbers, come out with vastly different opinions as to what the interpretation of those numbers are. And some people like to use that almost as if they're stating facts when they're stating opinion. How would you go about talking to or managing those people so as not to put their opinions in a light that, one, minimizes their opinion, but second of all, gives it a stronger opposite opinion as to what you really believe the truth to be?
I think that goes back to what I've said earlier about listening, that it is important that people feel heard. So what I would do is attempt to make sure that I'm completely hearing what they're saying and understanding and mirror that back. I also would work to make sure that they could hear where I see things going also, and I would tend to use facts. I would not discount someone's perspective. I would find similarities between the way that I see it and they see it, so we have some common ground. And then I would work to shift and ask questions. And usually if you ask questions, they may be able to expand their view a little bit differently to maybe embrace some of what you're trying to do and accomplish.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Oh, do you have any questions for us?
So in the search committee, I had asked the search committee what were the most important things that were coming up for the town, and I did hear the school, a new school building and the water. So I think what I'd like to ask for the selectmen is, I do believe that this is a two-way interview that I'm making sure, because if I come here, if you made me the offer and I come here, I will commit to 10 years to 15 years here. So I'm also looking that I would be a good fit for you in what you're looking for. So my question would be, what are you looking for in a town manager? And how do you want to be related to?
Mr. Chairman?
I'll go. You going? So, from my perspective, I'm looking for someone, obviously you have the qualifications, so we won't talk, you're obviously qualified. But I'm looking for somebody who can come in, understands that this is not only a town hall in transition, but a community in transition, because we've had this, Dan Morgado's been our manager for 20 years, and as you know, we haven't had many managers. So someone who can come in and understand that, knows how to affect change, but also, will honor sort of the past and what has been, because that has been very important, very strong to the core of the way that the staff, the town hall works, the department heads, but also can bring us into the next phase, the future, and understands, sort of where we want to go. So in terms of the Board of Selectmen, I think we have a style where, again, we work with the manager. We're not we don't day-to-day micromanage. I think I can speak for my colleagues here. So we would be looking for the new manager to help and support, to understand, just how much support you would want from the selectmen. Obviously, I'm talking about the day-to-day. Obviously, where policy is a different thing. And then sort of, what do we need to support you, but stay out of your way as you sort of go about getting your feet wet and affecting change and helping the town hall and the community to transition.
Thank you.
Well, I think I appreciate very much what Mr. Morgado brought to our town. I think he was very true in what he said. He was very exact in what he said. In fact, I don't know of a person who could cite numbers any better than he could. That said, I think we've moved on, and even he would admit that over the course of time, it's become more and more difficult to manage in a way that he can feel effective and yet have so many questions come from so many different areas and be expected to be on top of every one of them. He had a policy somewhat internally driven where he liked to be on top of everything. I think that we're looking for potentially a manager who will distribute that responsibility to a different degree, not completely, not to advocate especially budgeting and things like that, but to make sure that the appropriate amount of resources can be put to the things that are needed without the full attention of only the town manager being able to handle it.
So
That might be just my opinion, so,
like Mrs. Miller, I want a manager who's going to respect the past and where we've been, but also someone who's going to look to the future and advocate for change that's going to take us in a positive direction. I also would like a manager who really empowers the manager's department heads. Mr. Morgado has done that. I'd like to see that continue. I think the more you can grow your department heads, the more effective your organization is going to be, and the more effective that the town manager is going to be. I also want to see someone who is able to engage the community, and somebody who's going to be able to improve communication with the community, probably through social media, or however it gets done. The information cycle is a lot shorter than it used to be. And I think we need to be moving forward and acknowledging that in the way people get their news. So that's what I'd be looking for. Anyone else?
Well, I think I agree with most, perhaps not all of what my colleagues said, but I think the overall themes are the same. We're not a community in crisis. We're not looking for immediate, bold, sweeping change. As was mentioned, I think we're very proud of what's gone on here during Dan Magato's administration and for years before that. But we've had change. There's certainly been ongoing change over that period of time. There's been an evolution. Often the change is very considered and incremental. Occasionally it needs to be quick, bold, and decisive. So that's really a feel as a manager gets to know the community. The manager gains some sense of that. So I think the board's position is we're not married to the past, and we're certainly open to think about changes in either policy and procedure or policy and procedure. But we don't feel compelled to do that unless we find good reason to do that. And we're looking for a manager, to have a fresh set of eyes come in. There is some advantage to that. One notices things when they come into a novel situation that over time they become habituated to, and it's that thing that seems odd after a while no longer seems odd. So it's great to be able to address that at the beginning. I think that's what we're looking for, a manager that's not afraid to make suggestions to us and can handle it if we go along or if we don't.
Thank you.
I think it's been covered. That's it. Okay.
Thank you very
Thanks very
much.
much. We'll see you Thursday. You're going to be meeting with the department heads.
Yes, sir.
And 5:30, you'll be attending a public meet and greet. And I apologize for saying your name wrong in the beginning.
Not a problem,
know it.
sir. Thank you.
okay,
If I
thank you.
could just say in closing that I appreciate the time and allowing me to come. My mouth wasn't quite working. I was very surprised at how nervous I was. But in hearing everything and having an opportunity to talk with you, I think that it would be a good fit, and I have the energy to becoming next time manager. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are back. It's our third interview of the evening. In this interview, we have Kevin Mizikar, Town Administrator from Leicester.
Hi.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Kevin, would you like to start by giving us a little background on yourself, a little history of your professional background?
Absolutely. First, I just wanted to thank the board for the opportunity to be here with you this evening. I'm really looking forward to our discussion. Thank the screening committee for their confidence for sending me on. I've worked in the public sector for the last 15 years now, where I've really dedicated myself to providing the highest quality public services that I could for to the residents that I serve. I'm currently the town administrator for the town of Leicester, where I've helped that community overcome significant financial challenges. I was greeted with a $725,000 budget deficit and a failed Proposition 2.5 override question with my first week on the job. But I'm really proud at the way the team really quickly turned the tables to balance the budget. And the community now has a AA+ bond rating from Standard & Poor's. AA+ is the second highest rating that Standard & Poor's offers, and arguably the highest that any community of that size could ever achieve. Prior to that, I was the assistant town administrator, the first assistant town administrator for the town of Grafton, where I really helped that community focus on a strategic management plan and meet the goals that the selectman and the town administrator had set forth. I was also the first economic development director for the town of Mount Holly Township, New Jersey. Despite the rough economic conditions at the time whenever I was there, I'm proud of the strategic development plan that we were able to develop that increased the number of businesses within the community and also helped us secure over $7 million in state funding for economic development purposes while I was there. So it was interesting being the first individual in both of those two positions because I really got to learn hands-on the difference between management and leadership abilities and how to shape the role of those positions and affect change as the new person within the organization. My drive to become a town manager really began whenever I was in graduate school. However, my understanding of excellence and high performance within an organization came during my service at the federal level in Washington, D.C. Whenever I was an analyst with the Department of Energy, I was selected by the President's Administrator for Information Technology to work on a project within the White House that completely revamped how all federal agencies performed administrative back office functions like human resource management and financial management. I was really driven to apply for this position because of Schusberg's commitment to excellence and what you see for yourself. There's a consistency between my values and skills and what the community is looking for in their next town manager. I'd really look forward to sharing specific career accomplishments and what I would really like to achieve throughout the rest of my career with you this evening. Thanks for the opportunity to be here again, and I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, thank you. We're going to start on this side of the room and ask a series of questions and take as much time as you need to answer each one.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Fitzgerald.
Well, Kevin, good evening. And that was a very nice and clear and concise opening remark.
Thank you.
So I applaud you for that. In keeping with clear and concise, what I'd like to know is a little bit about your management style.
Sure.
About how you like to communicate within your own teams, your direct reports, your greater organization here, and then follow that up on the kind of trials and tribulations in dealing with public, and what might you be able to do in that regard to be as effective with managing not only your own team, but working with the public at large.
Sure. Thank you. Great long question. So my management style, I prefer a very strategic, focused organization. What I mean by that, I'm comfortable within an organization that has clearly defined goals from the top down, and from the bottom up, and they should all be integrated. So I like to work through what's called a high-performance model, where the mission of the organization is set forth. The goals at the Board of Selectmen level are established, and departments would then establish goals that support the specific goals of the Board of Selectmen. And that would be integrated into the budget process on an annual basis. So we ask very simple questions when it comes time to funding things. Does it fall within the department's goals within that year, which reinforce the goals of the Board of Selectmen? I think that type of organization and that strategic framework that you would set up provides department heads, staff members, employees, and the Board of Selectmen with a responsibility and understanding of what it is that they have to do on a day-in, day-out basis. It leaves less room for question and allows individuals to explore and work within that framework while being creative. I think communication is one of my greatest strengths. I think I communicate most effectively by listening. And if you're able to listen and fully understand a problem before you jump in or cut someone off, it not only provides them with the respect that they deserve, but obviously gives you the best opportunity to understand what it is they're trying to communicate with you. I'm really dedicated to being as transparent as possible. I think local governments should use the most modern tools to be as transparent when we can. There's many tools that are out there. Obviously, a lot of low-hanging fruit like social media and establish social media accounts in Grafton, establish them in Leicester as well. We utilize those to the best of our ability with the resources that we have. Certainly not a catch-all. There's other modern technology, integrative apps and programs that I've explored and understood in my positions, like See, Click, Fix, and other things that give residents the opportunity to communicate with the town whenever they have the time and the ability to do so, when it's most convenient for them. And I think that's really important in today's society, if I can say that. Whenever I'm working with department head individuals or staff members, I try to be as open as possible. I set goals and expectations with them on an annual basis. Again, that works within that strategic framework. I said in my opening statements that I really helped Grafton transition into a strategic management style or a strategic management system. And what I mean by that is we established that framework for the first time in Grafton, and I also established it for the first time in Leicester, where department heads agree to goals on an annual basis, are personally reviewed for the accomplishments of those goals, and have the discretion and ability to push the work out on a day-to-day basis to their staff as they see fit. I meet with department heads really at whatever is most convenient for them and most effective for both of us. With some department heads, I find that they stop in my office on a daily basis. For others, that's a standing 2-week one-on-one meeting that we have both have in our schedules, and if that's the approach we take, it becomes a monument within the schedule that's immovable, because that's important time if that's the only time that we're going to meet. Dealing with the public beyond social media and some of those other technologies, I find it important to be out in the community on hazard or emergency or challenge or problem basis. I do things, as I shared with the screening committee, like on a monthly basis, cook breakfast at the senior center with the chief of police and the superintendent of schools, and go out and have breakfast with the seniors. Also at the senior center, I have coffee quarterly. Just go in the library and sit there and talk with folks, and they can ask any questions that we want. I think you have to be as transparent with your staff as you do with the public. We have an open town meeting form of government in Leicester. I've established a town meeting guide that, for this town meeting is a 25-page document that not only provides the warrant article and the proposed motion, but my description. As I'm putting my binder together for town meeting, I was writing a description, what I would say anyhow. Why not share that with folks at the beginning of April rather than them hearing it for the first time at town meeting? And I also, just keeping on the town meeting focus, have public information sessions prior to every town meeting, where it's coming up on April 24th, I will set aside the evening starting at 6 o'clock, go sit in the Selectmen's conference room, invite residents in through as many venues as we can get the word out, and give them the opportunity pre-town meeting to come in and ask their questions that maybe they would be uncomfortable sharing on town hall floor, or just wanted more information in advance of the meeting so they can make the best informed decision. So I like to pride myself on a very strategic, well thought out management style, framework, and organization, and be transparent as I can with residents and staff and anyone else that wants to interact with the local government.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Kane?
Could you please describe for us your experience in capital expenditure planning, financing, and implementation, and specifically any experience you have with the Mass School Building Authority?
Thank you, yes. I do have quite a bit of experience in capital improvement projects. It started off, really the first project was wrapping up as I came on board in the town of Grafton. Was a fire station project. That was about a $6.5 million project that was coming to fruition just as I was coming on board. I have managed a lot of projects from the outset, from the initial planning stages, at least as much as I could with those organizations. Currently working on 2 specific projects in different phases in Leicester. We're building a fire station right now, $6.5 million project. Renovating a library with a 50% matching state grant. It's a $9 million project. So again, as I shared with the screening committee, capital projects are fun, fantastic, and very exciting until they're not. The fire station project that we're dealing with should be about 85% completed, and it's 20% completed. So I'm getting a lot of good hands-on experience of what to do when things go wrong. So not so fun to deal with on a day-to-day basis, but it is certainly good experience. But I think leading a community into a capital planning process is maybe more fun than me than seeing the bricks and mortar go up. When I was in Grafton, after that fire station was completed, they built a $72 million high school that you may be familiar with. And on their list also contained at the time the renovation of their library, a DPW facility, and that's all that's coming to mind right now. But there are 3 other major projects that they were facing, and there was a lot of angst within the community about well, we just built this high school, and now it was a Proposition 2.5 override, so now our tax rate's going to go up. And what if we do, when are we going to bring the DPW on board, and when are we going to do the library, and how is this all going to work? So the community started to vote at town meeting more out of fear than out of good knowledge and a comfort that they should have when they're making these infrastructure improvement projects and decisions for the community. So we set aside time and worked with department heads first and said, what is it do you think you need from a capital planning standpoint within the next 10 years? Let's be honest and open it up to that point. And then we also looked at what our current debt was, how that debt impacted the tax rate, what those funding sources were they overrides or not, and put that all together in some graphics and numeric forms. And then we invited all of the elected and appointed officials that served on boards and committees to have what we called a capital summit at Tufts University there within Grafton, a nice setting for a comfortable discussion. And we started to move those planned projects into the impact on the tax rate slides and said, well, if we build a DPW in 2025, the tax rate's going to dip in 2018 and then go back up in 2025. And we looked at all these different scenarios. The outcome of that summit was that the Board of Selectmen established a capital debt policy as it relates to the impact on the tax rate. So they were able to draw a line at a particular point of debt and said, we are going to strive to not only maintain below this debt, below this level, but at this level. And what I really learned from that process is that a known stable tax rate is one of your greatest allies when you're dealing with capital improvement projects. So once the community understood that we were going to do everything that we could to keep things level and stable and predictable in the future, we started to get to those votes and overcame that fear and made a good bit of progress.
How about water and sewer?
Water and sewer, I have less experience with. We were in the planning stages. Thank you. That was the third project. Grafton is in the phases of building a $50 million sewer plant. So I saw some in the beginning of that stuff and how we looked at the SRF and got those funds in from the state through their revolving loan fund. In Grafton, the town doesn't have their own water and sewer districts. But because of some water challenges within Grafton, within Leicester, I have worked closely with those water superintendents and did my best to support them in any capital planning initiatives they had.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lamar?
So I just want to make sure I understand the structure in which you're operating in Leicester. You're essentially the CFO and develop the budget.
I'm the Chief Administrative Officer, so yes, I do serve as the CFO.
CFO,
Correct.
about HR, is that?
Yes.
Under your
HR falls
authority
to
as
me.
well? Contract negotiations?
Yes, sir.
Collective bargaining, I mean.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about collective bargaining and how you approach that, both practically and what your philosophy is?
Sure. I'll work strategically through any given negotiation, the process that I've taken, whether it's in Grafton or Leicester. But Leicester specifically in the TA role, the first step for me is always meeting with the board of selectmen to make sure that whenever I go into the negotiating table that I'm working within broadly defined parameters, that whenever I bring a contract back to them for their signature, since they're the signature authority, they're going to be comfortable with it. The last thing I want to do is go to a negotiating table and represent something to the employees that is just not going to work out in the end. I've learned to build and develop relationships with both individuals, staff members, whether they're in a union, whether they're the union president or non-union employees, consistently. And that's having an open, collegial style with them to make sure that, we have a clear, open communications when we're sitting at the table. So union presidents, I've worked probably as informally as it probably comes, off-the-record conversations when they need to happen. But when I sit down at the table and pass the town's initial offers over to them, I want them to know that they're firm, within the parameters, that there are certain things that the town is looking for, and that we're willing to negotiate and support them throughout the process as well to understand what they're having. In Leicester, I've just wrapped up my second 3-year contract with the police. We're working on the second 3-year contract with Highway. I think both are very fair. Both sets of those contracts with both organizations are very fair. They're well within the parameters that the Board of Selectmen have established for me, and I feel that the town is benefiting from management rights and quality of work and work hours standpoint, and the union is getting benefits financially as they have asked for. So did my best to try to let you know that, I really work as informally as possible leading up to the final process, which occurs at the negotiating table at the end.
Okay, how many units do you have in Leicester?
In Leicester, we have 2 within the police department, a highway department, and a fire.
Any arbitrations?
Not yet, no.
And so you talk about your informal process leading to the formal
Yep.
process. When you walk into to sit at the table,
Yep.
administrators and managers have employed different tactics.
Sure.
Some of them like to come in with labor council, some of them like to come in with the individual
Okay.
department head. What do you think about that?
I've never had labor council by my side in these negotiations. It really depends on the preference of the department head. If they want to be there, they're certainly welcome to be there. I definitely meet with them in advance to make sure that we can, get any of their management concerns done and up front, and we address those in our initial offers. I'll tell you, my police chief in Leicester sits at the table with me. Is very helpful. The highway superintendent does not participate in the negotiations.
Okay, you've got a good police chief.
Kevin, you mentioned the difference between management and leadership abilities. So maybe you could expand on that a little bit, specific to a scenario, hopefully a real-life example, where you've had a situation where you have 2 or more people who are diametrically opposed, totally different perspectives on a subject. How would you go about handling that? How do you go about doing it in a fair manner, but achieving your objective?
Sure. I prefer the leadership approach, I have to tell you, because I see leadership as overarching culture, value, method of working with individuals on a day-to-day basis. I see management as a more forceful hand in driving strategy and making those final decisions whenever everyone doesn't necessarily want to come along. So it's my goal to always instill within the organization from the ground up the ability to operate under that leadership model versus the management model. So when dealing with 2 individuals, whether it's employees or residents that diametrically oppose, I fall back on my communication skills where I like to have both of them in the room at the same time, right? So there's no he said, she said, and we're all going to work this out together. I ask them to be adults, but share what their concerns are and get everything out on the table from the beginning. And then I do my best to sit back and just listen as much as possible and find little ways, caveats, or small items of facts that may be substantial to drive a common ground between the 2 individuals and develop a mutually beneficial solution. Now, especially when it comes to employees, that doesn't always happen. I can give you an example where I had a department head and a staff member that are water and oil, still are water and oil. But they have to understand that within the organization, they're going to treat each other with respect. They both have very important jobs to do for us, and that I expect them to when they interact with each other and I'm not there, to be as if I was in the room, and don't come to me all the time, because it becomes more and more of a concern, more and more of a pain, and then both of them are going to dislike the resolution to those problems the more that they bring them to me. I ask, again, people to be adults, and I found that, most times that when you tell people to be adults, they realize they're being children, and they start to work better together.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. So how about in a scenario where you have, your Board of Selectmen, and you see them going down a path of making a decision that is, you have real concerns, is going to be a problem in the community.
Okay.
Could you address a little bit about maybe an experience you've had and how you go about handling that with your specific board members?
Sure. So, in Leicester specifically, there's a significant concern over there's three water districts within the community. And they're all under separate administrative consent orders. None of them are operated by the town of Leicester. They're all their own separate political subdivisions. And the Board of Selectmen has a role in that process, not only from leaders of the community standpoint, but also because there's a body of water within Leicester that's called Moose Hill Reservoir that the water rights are held by the town. So the Board of Selectmen have the authority over that, and it could play a role in the future water solutions for the town. I have a selectman that wants to work with the water districts from the bully pulpit and kind of shame them in public and do everything that they can to twist their arms to kind of get them to conform and improve things. And then I have another selectman that wants to be as hands-off, say that we don't have a role in the process, and that we should allow the water districts or separate political subdivisions to work on their own. What I found is, again, bringing both of those individuals together to have a conversation within the room has provided great value. We found common ground where we've toned down the public rhetoric, but also defined that true meaningful role for the Board of Selectmen to have in this process. We've come back to the public meeting and had the entire board vote on the direction that they wanted to move in, and we've been implementing that plan on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, both board members still have their prerogative and their final thoughts, and the one that wants to be a little bit more out there in the public is, and that's certainly their prerogative, and they think there's value to that. But I know, as long as I know that all 5 board members are consistent and have voted on a direction, I feel better, and I know that the community is working in the direction that is most beneficial to all residents.
Okay, Mr. Fitzgerald?
You don't have a question in between?
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
I'll certainly jump in if you want.
No, I have a question. Could you talk about your experience and familiarity with school budgeting?
School budgeting?
School budgeting.
Okay. Absolutely, thank you. So I've had the benefit to working with 2 great school superintendents. My approach with school budgeting is, I'm certainly not an expert on it. I've relied heavily on the superintendents that I've worked with to, establish the budget and provide leadership in those areas. I have worked with both of them on a day-to-day basis throughout the budget development process to set numbers first and foremost up front. And whenever there's discrepancies on the back end, if they can't meet that number, I've rolled up my sleeves and worked with them to better understand what they're proposing, the implications of what any changes may mean to the school department, and you really use that information to advise the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Advisory Committee through my capacity on when I think we need to ask the school department to cut and when I think we need to find some room within the school budget because the impact on education is going to be too great. Again, it's really establishing a great relationship on day one with that individual. I certainly do not have the knowledge that either of those superintendents had within the school budget process, but I think my willingness to show them my side of the book, so to speak, opened up the doors to allow for a very harmonious and beneficial situation for both sides of the local government to be able to provide the services at the level that we can best afford within the community.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Fitzgerald?
So Kevin, we've been very fortunate that we've made good progress towards certain liabilities, one of them being our pension liability. In fact, in a few years, we hope to have that reasonably to zero, which is an unusual situation. However, it's taken a lot out of us to get to that point. It's not been easy. It's been tough, as a matter of fact. This past year, we put just over $5.5 million to that catch-up process. But we're glad that the results are going to be shown in the next few years. That being said, we have a bigger liability in the OPEB liability right around the corner. Only marginally have we addressed any funds into that, but there's an opportunity for us to pivot in a few years to put money towards that and to play some catch-up. I guess the question is, how far do we go? And how much do we do to balance this? As I've said to the other candidates that were here, there might not be a good answer, but I'd like to hear your opinion as to what you think an approach might be to looking at those funds that we'll have suddenly freed up and how we might put them to the best use possible.
Sure. I've certainly read as much as I could about the financial situation that the town is in, especially as it relates to those two matters. You know, I obviously commend your effort to reduce the pension liability to zero by 2022 and understand there may be some opportunity to get there before then. I personally think that you should keep on track to 2022, even if that means opening up or not dedicating as much free cash or other revenue sources to that as you have in this previous year. If the market's working for your advantage, 2022 is certainly much more aggressive than any other pension system that I know of in the state. Obviously, it will serve you well to get there, but there's no reason to really hurt the operations of most of the rest of the budget if that's what it's doing. As far as OPEB goes, OPEB obviously is a problem across the state and the nation. It's something that we as local government managers really need to address. I see it being different than your pension liability. Obviously, first and foremost, starting to contribute to that trust fund now is as important as it is for any young person to contribute to their retirement, because the sooner you build funds, or the sooner you have funds, the sooner you can build funds on top of those. What I think communities need to start doing is finding a consistent, ongoing revenue source that they can dedicate to OPEB. And I would shy away from solely relying upon lump sum payments of free cash to go in to satisfy your OPEB liability, or dedicating what I would suggest doing is dedicating either a new portion of the local tax revenue, a new local option tax that may become available in the future, to funding OPEB liabilities. So that would be your lump sum type payment that wasn't really tied to anything. So if the town, for instance, was able to adopt a new local option revenue, there's several pending at the state right now that you would be able to dedicate to OPEB liability. I think 100% of those funds should go to that to start eating down at your total accrued liability for the future. The other thing, the second part of it, I think that's very important, is that for every new employee that we hire starting on a specific date, and I would say July 1 of 2017, we need to be funding their future liability 100% today. So if we work with our actuaries and find that that's $3,000 if you're in your, the first 10 of your 30 years, and then it goes up, or however it works. We need to start funding those the first day that they're on board. Otherwise, we're always going to be chasing our tail. We're never going to get rid of that accrued liability.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay.
What book are you currently reading?
What am I currently reading? I'm actually currently reading The Presence.
What is that?
It's a book about how you handle and compose yourself on a day-to-day basis. Things like body language.
I should buy that, Henry. Can you spell that?
Things like body language, taking cues from other individuals to see how you're doing, and how people compose themselves and hold themselves within certain situations. And I find it to be beneficial to me for my confidence whenever I'm in specific situations, maybe like this. I don't know how well I'm doing, but and then, just on a day-to-day work basis as a leader within the community, when a tragedy strikes or bad things come up, it's important that you compose yourself well and put on a great face for that community. I'll tell you a story. I don't want to get too far off track, but I also mentioned it to the screening committee. Officer Ron Tarantino was a resident of Leicester and a 7-year member of the Leicester Police Department. When he was tragically murdered last spring, there's a lot of gut wrenching going on inside my body, whether I got on that bus to go to the church the day of the wake. And being able to compose yourself in situations like that and put on that face for the community and represent whatever little or however much it means to individuals is important. I think all town leaders should be able to do that and do that well. So it's something that I pride myself on.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
How do you approach change, change of any type, particularly in this setting into which you may be walking, considering that you would be in the shadow of a long-serving, well-respected town manager who will continue to live in town?
Sure. Change is always manageable, I think, by being transparent and providing as much information as you can to everyone. I think I handle change personally very well. I'm very calm demeanor, and I support that through by being a very open and what I consider fluent communicator. I don't make decisions on my own. I think decisions are best made throughout the organization with staff at all levels. And I have no problem pulling a team together of department heads or individuals to help come up with a solution, engaging with residents through a variety of ways to help them be part of the solution. So change is not something that I shy away from. It's not something that I'm afraid of. I think it's something that if we're not doing on a day-to-day basis, we're not getting better. And one of the things that I think that we have to do with the community as we embrace change is find out true, meaningful ways of engaging with individuals. There's many ways that communities think they're engaging with individuals, and I think social media is a good first step. But a lot of times we still use social media to only inform. And true, powerful engagement means individuals of the community and staff members and board members should have a true ownership of a decision from cradle to grave, so to speak. So as we are looking to redevelop our strategic planning documents in Leicester, both on the town side and school side, the superintendent and I came together and we partnered with an organization called Thought Exchange to engage with the community. This is a new survey tool that uses broad, open-ended questions rather than the traditional check boxes to engage with the community and ask them how we're doing, what they think we should be doing better, and where we're not focused on at all that they think we should be moving the organization towards. So this is a three-step process where individuals answer 4 very broad questions with as much language as that they want to use. Second phase is everyone goes back and is allocated a finite number of stars, and they star what is most important to them in this thought exchange process. And now we're in the discover phase in Leicester where we've taken everyone's comments, we've allowed everyone to vote on them, and we're using that information to build change, to strategically move the town in the direction that we want to move it in or that the community wants to move it in. So finding new ways to engage with residents and staff members to bring them in at the beginning phases of change takes a lot of the uncertainty out of the room and makes change much more manageable for all individuals.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. LeBeau.
Could you talk a little bit about your experience with planning, what you've done? We just completed, I believe, our 3rd master plan. We're about to go into an implementation phase. What you see the manager's role in that process?
Well, I've never had the opportunity to work through an entire master planning process in any community that I've worked with. In Leicester, unfortunately, I see the ill ways of a master plan and how it can be a detriment to a community if the manager doesn't have a strong and forceful role. And I see the manager's role as looking across all levels of planning, economic development, zoning, housing, parks and recreation, open space, and making sure that as decisions are made within one of those silos, so to speak, that it doesn't have negative implications in the future on a revenue stream of the town or the ability for the town to grow. There's a dichotomy in Leicester in its master planning document that they worked as a community through the early 2000s to really restrict housing growth. But at the same time, within that same master planning document, it talks about all the new services and initiatives that they wanted to take on. And that's all completely juxtaposition to each other. So without the growth within the community, within the tax base, and because of a lack of commercial growth, the town hasn't been able to realize the services and what I would consider baseline services in parks and recreation that many other communities enjoy. So I think the manager really has to engage within the process from the beginning and make sure that there is an oversight role of how each and every one of those 4 or 5 different areas interact, especially when it comes to the financial well-being of the community and the revenue streams that are associated with development and having enough funding to have the services that the community desires.
New topic, new question. What do you do for fun?
What do I do for fun? I like to run. I did very well in my positioning statement 3 days ago on the treadmill. I think I did better on the treadmill than I did here this evening, so I wasn't taping it, so I have no proof of that. But yeah, I love to run. I have 2 kids, two daughters, a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old, that have the most challenging schedules that I'm sure, you know, anyone that has a young one these days, it's just amazing what they engage in. I'm super proud of them. I chase them all over the Commonwealth and the region playing soccer. You know, I played soccer whenever I was a kid growing up, so that's great fun for me to see my 7-year-old a whole lot better than I ever was. So, you know, running, you know, is a big stress relief for me, and, you know, chasing those kids around and enjoying family time with them when I can is just as therapeutic.
Thank you.
So Kevin, kind of building on that a little bit, you live in Fiskdale, which
I do.
is Sturbridge.
Yes,
for
it is.
Folks who may not know. And you work in Leicester.
I do.
Been there for 4 years, and prior to that Grafton, so you've had some time now with that commute, not living in the community that you work.
Sure.
So, you know, how do you do that successfully? What do you find to be the challenges? And how do you get to know people in the community?
Sure.
Interact with them when you don't live in the community?
I find great benefit for not living in the community that I work in. I'll give you an example. From my personal life, in dealing with the town of Sturbridge, that I think I would have had a conflict or more challenges than the Sturbridge town administrator did. So I live in a community where there's a lot of activity and walking, and there's a particular concern over an individual that there's a lot of property trespass going on. Well, I was able to go to the Sturbridge town administrator as a resident to deal with that individual with that problem and represent myself and you know, fellow neighbors and, you know, being a aggrieved party. Versus if, you know, I lived within that community, I would have had to pass that off to someone else to make that decision. It was really a role the town administrator needed to be involved in and orchestrate from that level and come up with the best solution, the best impartial solution for the good of the community. I would find that challenging living in the community that I work in. I know many people do it successfully, but that's my personal preference. I engage within the community as much as possible. So just because I live there doesn't mean, you know, my wife and kids don't come to the fire department barbecues or the harvest fair. In Leicester, I was a taste tester, you know, at the harvest fair. You know, so I'm still at community events. I make myself available for the, you know, if there's a Little League parade or whatever it is that I can do to be part of that community in a non-suit and tie setting, so to speak. I think that I can learn as much about the community and build friendships and alliances within that community, just like I would if I lived there. I was certainly humbled whenever I applied, or even before I applied for this position, to have individuals from the town of Leicester that had no affiliation with boards or committees reach out to me and say, you know, whenever I interacted with you on this, that, or the other thing, it was fantastic, and I really appreciated your service to the community, and I think this would be a great opportunity for you professionally. I mean, I think that really shows my ability to build relationships within a community, and regardless of where I live. Certainly the challenges that come with that is you have to be here a lot, and I understand that, and my family understands that. I certainly do my best to carve out specific times or evenings within certain times of the year to make sure I have that interaction with my kids and my wife, you know, to you know, continue a strong family relationship that we have. But they're understanding. You know, I met my wife when I was in college, and we moved to Washington, D.C. together. Then we moved to New Jersey together, and now we live in Massachusetts, where we have the deepest roots that we ever have and have no desire to leave. Unfortunately for me, or I don't see it as a detriment, but I know this community has had a resident manager, you know, for its duration. With my kids ingrained in the school district and, you know, in the social setting that we find ourselves in, it's something that we want to continue to do, and I don't think that impacts my professional ability to perform this job at all.
Another question? Sure. Switching a little bit. So what do you absolutely love about your work? And on the opposite side, what just, as I said, sometimes say makes your hair hurt, just drives you crazy about what you do?
I can tell you I absolutely love the relationships and interaction that I have with my staff members. You know, especially in Leicester, I mean, it's such a wonderful group of people at the town hall that we really work as a team. You know, they were in an environment, you know, before I got there that was a little more challenging, and they've really embraced that leadership style that I've brought to the table, the management of the office. We've really created a friendship. We have, you know, somewhat appropriate, you know, social outings and things like that. So being able to build a team and work with a team is one of the most rewarding and amazing things that I think you can do in any position. I've had the chance since I've been in Leicester to make some promotions and watch individuals grow and coach them and help them along their way and make sure they're successful in their new role within the organization. I really think that, you know, building that pipeline for local government is something critical. You know, social media kind of becomes the bane of your existence in this position. I would so much rather be in my office till 11 o'clock at night answering phone calls about what's really going on in the water district than, you know, having a selectman or a resident printing out a Facebook posting for me and saying what's going on here. You know, so, you know, that type of environment that's 24/7, that's no offense to anyone, oftentimes wrong, it just really wastes a lot of staff time and causes a lot of angst for a lot of good-working, hard-working people. You know, my highway superintendent, who would, you know, rather stand on his head 24 hours a day than be on social media, really took a beating in one of the snowstorms. It was just a rough snowstorm. And he, you know, comes into my office visibly upset because of all these postings that people have provided to him. You know, so I really despise that. You know, we can interact with and deal with residents and provide them with great solutions if we're given the opportunity, but we're not often given that opportunity before they bash us on Facebook or other social media.
Okay. You mentioned in your opening that you have, sound like a lot of economic development experience. Could you talk about that and tell us what you'd bring to the town?
Sure. As an overall premise, well, I have two overall premises for economic development. One, you need dedicated resources for economic development if you really have an interest in attracting particular types of high-quality development in the community and not just allowing the market to dictate where the community goes. And I really mean a dedicated, especially in a town the size of Shrewsbury, at least one dedicated full-time employee whose goal, job, mission is to provide economic development services and professional leadership. From a development standpoint, whenever you look at the types of development that you want within a community, I think we have to move beyond just look at zoning and other land use and environmental restrictions whenever we consider whether a project is right for a community. We really have to look at the financial implications so that we're sure that over the long term, and I'm talking 40 to 50 years, that not only are we raising enough revenue on an annual basis to ensure the infrastructure is maintained and that the services associated with that development, whether they be education or otherwise from the town, are met, but also that we can replace that infrastructure when it's time to replace it, and we can rebuild the schools when they're time, you know, when it's time for them to be replaced. If we don't have that driven focus, for development, we often run a Ponzi scheme in local government where you need the next development opportunity to pay for the infrastructure of 30 years ago, or you're just forced to burdening the tax rate all the time, and residents obviously don't like spending their hard-earned dollars on increasing the tax rate to replace a sewer line that was put in place 50 years ago that has been burdening the community ever since. So I found success in development and working with the community, understanding what it is that they want. Then once we look at particular sites, like I know you're looking at Centec Park right now through a site preparedness grant program that I'm familiar with, and I'm working on a maybe competing project in Leicester. We have to understand what will fit there. We have to do the market analysis. We have to do the pre-development investments, take time as a community to help get the right businesses in town, make sure they're not competing with other businesses, and that they're beneficial and the right. You can't chase every you can't be the dog that chases every car down the street. You have to know what you want to go after for economic development, and you have to be out there in that marketplace and attracting them in, day in, day out.
Thank you.
Maybe just to follow up on your question on economic development, a lot's been said already about, our local needs for economic development. Of course, we have to be realistic in that we're a mostly residential community, 87%. That being said, there is still opportunity, but there's also regional opportunities that can maybe work together in a different way. Have you had any experience in more regional economic development versus a hyper-local economic development?
Honestly, most of my experience with economic development is local. I have a lot of success otherwise, including many initiatives with the town of Shrewsbury and other regional initiatives like public health. It was part of standing up and expanding the Veteran Service District whenever I was in Grafton. So I don't see why economic development shouldn't be considered from a regional standpoint. If you look at what really needs to happen for Central Mass as a region, we have a lot more ability to affect that change as a region than we do as an individual town. I can tell you that more recently, but I don't want to make it sound bigger than it is. I have been working with the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce on the comprehensive economic development strategy that they're pulling together. That strategy will open up federal funding through the Economic Development Administration. When towns identify projects and parcels and development areas within their community and participate in that CEDS, Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy process, we then have the door into federal government to provide that aid. So, I think working through initiatives like that, will be important, to find that balance and making sure the whole region prospers.
Good, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Kane, did you have another question?
All set, thank you.
Oh, okay. Mr. LeBeau?
Good.
Okay. And I'm good. Okay. So, do you have any questions for us before we finish up?
I do have I certainly have a couple questions. At least one question I think that's most important to me. So obviously your tenure with managers in the community is phenomenal. It's second to none. And from my experience in Central Massachusetts, obviously a very well-run, highly prestigious organization. So I'd like to know, what do you see as one of the first challenges that the new person is going to face when they come into that, and what could be done in the near term to help ensure success early on for that challenge? One is fine, or
I think the biggest challenge, or the biggest issue before the new manager is going to be to make the transition as seamless as possible. We need to have a stable transfer of managers so that the operation continues to run well. Beyond that, I think we need somebody who, as I had said earlier in the evening, respects the past but looks to the future, but not moving so fast that it upsets the process. Mm-hmm. So, that's what I would say.
okay.
Anyone else?
I'd like to jump in on that one, because sometimes it's better to come into an absolute gong show, because if you show up smiling and can complete a sentence, you're a winner. But you're following a gentleman who has been here for how many years and established a very high level of performance. That bar is very high. He's the first in a snowstorm, and he lives a quarter of a mile away. So should this go somewhere, Kevin, you know, getting in at 9:15 on a snowy day, disaster for you within the building. That bar is set high. Technical expertise, as Henry said, he could come up with what the summer count was in 1982 and its highest year since, and all these things. So though you should not seek, no successor should seek to be the predecessor. You just need to be aware of that within context and get out there in the community and make sure they understand the new manager is in fact a different person. They have different skills and approaches to matters, but is that sound individual who they can trust? Because I think if there's one thing that Dan enjoyed and enjoys today, is that just unquestionable trust amongst people. Would never, ever tell you anything but what was the fact. If he didn't know it, he'd go find it. So it's that essence of the core that I think people need to get comfortable with in the next manager. The next manager can have all the hoo-ha, you know, statements and management expertise all they want. But if at the end of the day, the people of Shrewsbury don't feel as though they're getting that the essence of the Carney, the essence of the Morgado, the person's going to have a hard time.
Interesting. Thank you.
Well said. Have anything to add to it?
Well, I mean, I certainly think what both of my colleagues mentioned, you know, credibility, authenticity is paramount. But then if we start talking about nuts and bolts, we have a water system that needs continued attention. We're doing a new or expansion to our water treatment plant. There are issues that need to be addressed. And there's the issue that has been going on for 15 to 20 years now of how we assign budgetary priorities. Because we have a lot of demand for services that we don't have a revenue stream that necessarily supports. That's not unusual to Shrewsbury. But that's a constant battle to try to find what is the best allocation of those resources, because we have the same, you know, within the community we have divergent interests, and to try to find a way to satisfy to some degree all of those interests has been our annual challenge.
Well, I think building relationships through competence is the most important thing. I think that we have a history of highly competent managers, and the relationships they built the trust that goes along with it. On the side that Selectman LeBeau said with regard to, do we have a few issues? Absolutely. I think infrastructure is becoming much more difficult for us because it's aging and a lot's happening at once. Number one on the list has been a few years of water issues, water quality issues, water quantity issues that we have working towards solutions, but they've taken a while, and as such has put a strain on us.
Expand on the subject of the staff, town hall department heads and staff. We talked a little bit about this in the screening committee, but I think it's going to be critical because obviously change important, but it's going to have to be change done in a manner that is sensitive to the fact that you mentioned the success that we enjoy here in Shrewsbury as a manager. Well, a lot of that is also because of the people here. And so this is going to be a huge change for a lot of people. We have a number of individuals retiring, so it's going to be that balance of bringing in new. Again, it's kind of that honoring the past, but sort of I think it'll be a real challenge to support, mentor people through the change while also developing and bringing on your own staff and people into it. So I think that human resource issue is going to be a significant focus for the new manager.
Okay, anything else? No? Okay, so you'll be back Thursday?
Yep.
Talk with the department heads, 5:30, public meet and greet. So we'll see you then. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
We have a regular meeting tomorrow night.
Can you say that again?
We have a regular meeting
No, no.
tomorrow night.
The thing you said before that.
I
25th.
don't know, what did I say?
Thursday during,
Oh, Thursday, we're going to have a meet and greet.
right.
And then on the 25th,
Oh, okay.
we'll have a discussion. And if everybody's ready to vote, we'll vote to make an offer to candidate
On 25th.
on the 25th.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, so, there being no other business, could I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, or voted? We are adjourned. Good evening.